Katrina Wright's brow was originally from Germany. There, she met an American serviceman named Charles, and they fell in love and got married. After their wedding, Charles brought Katrina to the United States, where they settled in a small town called Heiress, Massachusetts, which had around 5,000 residents. Together, they had 2 children, a son and a daughter. After leaving the military, Charles worked at a local factory that made knives and surgical instruments, providing for the family while Katrina stayed at home as a housewife. Katrina and Charles enjoyed a long life together filled with happy moments. As their children grew up and started their own lives, Katrina remained active, social, and energetic. When her children visited on weekends, she joyfully danced and had fun with her daughter. It was often hard to find her at home. In contrast, Charles was quiet, reserved, and calm. In 1980, Katrina was on the verge of realizing her long-held dream. She wanted to return to Germany to see how her home country had changed and to visit relatives and friends with whom she had kept in touch through letters over the years. To make this trip possible, she saved money for a long time but was so anxious about the possibility of her savings being stolen that she carried a large amount of cash in an envelope with her everywhere she went. This included outings to local restaurants with friends and family. When they learned about her money-carrying habit, they were surprised and often questioned her reasoning. It seemed odd to them that Katrina wasn't afraid to walk around with so much cash, especially since it posed a risk to her safety. However, Katrina believed that leaving the money at home unattended was even riskier. She felt that if she kept cash, her travel savings would be safe. At 48 years old, she truly thought her concerns were unfounded, at least until May 21, 1980. On that day, as usual, Charles left for work around 7 a.m., while Katrina stayed home a bit longer before heading to her job. However, by 10 a.m., her colleagues began to worry because she had not arrived at work. This was unusual for her. They attempted to call her, but she didn't answer. They also couldn't reach Charles, as he was out of contact during his shift, and mobile phones had not yet been invented. To save time, her colleagues began contacting the couple's closest relatives whose phone numbers they had. They were able to reach the daughter-in-law who lived next door to Katrina. She agreed to check on Katrina. At 10:45, she went to the address. She knocked on the door and windows several times, but there was no response. Her calls went unanswered, and the windows were tightly covered. When she tried to get inside, she found the front door was unlocked. As soon as she opened the door, it was clear that a struggle had occurred in the house. In the kitchen, she found Katrina lying on the floor, bleeding and unresponsive. The room showed signs of a violent confrontation, with furniture, appliances, and books scattered all around. The sink was soaked with water and blood, creating a horrifying scene. The daughter-in-law immediately called 911 for help, hoping that Katrina could be saved. However, she was too scared to remain in the house and waited for emergency responders outside. Paramedics quickly arrived at the house but were unable to save Katrina, who had already died. Detectives were immediately on the scene to investigate the crime. It became clear that the likely killer knew Katrina, as evidenced by the violence of the attack and the fact that the windows and locks were undamaged. This suggested that Katrina either let the attacker in willingly or he had a key. The assault took place in the kitchen, where the attacker used water to wash something in the sink, likely his hands or face. The kitchen remained messy, with blood and water splattered around. A faint fingerprint was discovered on the screen, while a clearer print was found on a toaster lying on the floor. Additionally, several hairs were found clutched in Katrina's fist, likely pulled from the attacker during a struggle. Unfortunately, DNA analysis techniques were still in their infancy at that time, so investigators could only collect and store the evidence for future analysis. Forensic scientists focused on the fingerprints they found. An expert determined that Katrina had been attacked multiple times. The suspected murder weapon, a paring knife, was discovered in the trash under the sink. The murder occurred in the kitchen, and it was clear that the house had been ransacked. The victim, Katrina, had her jewelry stolen, along with an envelope containing money she had saved for a trip back to her homeland. Initially, law enforcement believed the motive behind the crime was the stolen money. However, Katrina was determined to keep her savings, which led her to fight back against the robber, resulting in her tragic death. The numerous stab wounds also suggested a possible personal motive. Investigators looked into Katrina's personal life but found no one who could commit such a violent act. She did not have any obvious enemies and was not vocal about having money in her home, with only her closest friends knowing about her savings. This limited circle led them to suspect her husband, Charles. They theorized that the murder might have taken place before he left for work around 7 a.m. Evidence linked the murder weapon, a knife, to Charles, as it was produced by the company where he worked. He acknowledged that this knife was often used in their kitchen. While many residents owned similar knives, the knife in question had been thoroughly cleaned, which raised suspicions. During the interrogation, Charles expressed deep sorrow over his wife's death. He had been married to her for decades and appeared genuinely grief-stricken. Still, the fact that the perpetrator used a kitchen knife instead of a premeditated weapon was unusual for such a crime. Despite his apparent distress, Charles was subjected to a polygraph test, which he passed. In addition to the numerous stab wounds, Katrina had suffered a blow to the head from a blunt object, likely a lamp found broken near her body in the kitchen. Ultimately, with the collection of fingerprints and blood samples from the scene and after questioning Charles, the police decided to send him home. From the beginning, he was hesitant to go home because it reminded him of the tragedy. In 1980, there were no specialized companies for crime scene cleanup, so he had to rely on his relatives for assistance. Consequently, Katrina's daughter and daughter-in-law ended up cleaning the kitchen and removing blood from various surfaces. They also expressed their concerns to the authorities, who believed that Katrina's attacker might have been someone she knew personally. To understand what happened, they explored various possibilities. During their conversations, they recalled a 25-year-old man named Kenneth Walters. Born on August 16, 1953, Kenneth was 26 at the time of the crime. He comes from a large, troubled family. He lives near Katrina, and some of his relatives are facing legal troubles. Kenneth himself had a history of minor criminal offenses. Before reaching adulthood, he had been arrested for participating in a knife fight. Since it was his first offense, he received a fine and was required to perform community service. A few weeks prior to Katrina's death, Kenneth had attacked law enforcement officers. Although a trial was scheduled for the day she was murdered, he was released on bail beforehand. Kenneth worked as a cook at a restaurant that Katrina frequently visited to spend time with her friends and family. While she did not interact with him directly, he might have learned about her possessing a large sum of money, possibly by overhearing her conversations during his shifts. Katrina's daughter and daughter-in-law informed the police of their suspicions regarding him. Law enforcement officers decided to investigate Kenneth as a potential suspect in the murder. They spoke with him, but he denied any involvement and did not show any typical signs of a murderer. However, his previous involvement in a knife fight raised suspicions against him. When the police interviewed Kenneth again, he provided a solid alibi, supported by documentation. He had a time card that clearly indicated the hours he worked at the restaurant, which confirmed his statement. His colleagues, who were on duty with him that night, also verified his alibi. Kenneth explained that he left home the night before at 10 p.m., worked the night shift, and did not leave the restaurant until around 9 a.m. the next morning. A friend drove him back home, where his girlfriend could also confirm his presence. He did not stay long at home. He quickly changed clothes, took a shower, and left. By 10 a.m., he was attending a court hearing related to an incident involving a police officer. Given his tight schedule, he simply did not have the opportunity to commit the crime before his court appearance. Kenneth dressed neatly and left for court, where he remained until 11 a.m. Afterward, he returned to the restaurant and stayed there until 12:30 p.m. When he got home, he encountered the police, who were canvassing the neighborhood. They spoke with him, examined his clothes and body for any blood or scratches, finding none, which did not raise any suspicion. A forensic expert determined that the murder occurred around 7 a.m., likely soon after her husband Charles left for work. Detectives believe the crime could have taken place between 7 and 10:45 a.m. when the body was discovered. Given the limited time Kenneth had before the trial, it seemed unlikely that he could have committed the crime and escaped unnoticed. After verifying Kenneth's alibi, he was removed from the list of suspects due to a lack of evidence of criminal activity. However, investigators did not completely rule him out of the investigation as the case progressed, though they did not find any new evidence. Fingerprints retrieved from the crime scene did not match any in existing databases, which were not very advanced at that time. The investigation stalled for 2 years with little to no progress. During this time, a man named Robert Osborne contacted the police, claiming he had important information regarding Catherine's murder. However, he expected to receive a reward for his testimony. Detectives indicated that a reward could only be offered to someone providing valuable information that led to an arrest. Robert suggested that law enforcement should interview Kenneth's ex-girlfriend, Brenda Marsh. At the time of the call, Robert was dating Brenda and was familiar with Kenneth's situation. He claimed that Kenneth had confessed to the murder during a private conversation. By the time the police received this tip, Brenda had already broken up with Kenneth, who was living elsewhere. Brenda confirmed that at the time of Katrina's murder, she and Kenneth were living together. She described Kenneth as rude and cruel. Brenda had a daughter with him, and they were struggling financially. Following the advice of Robert, her new boyfriend, she decided to turn Kenneth in, hoping to receive a reward that would help her situation. According to Brenda, on the evening of May 20th, 1980, Kenneth left their home around 10 p.m. to go to work at a restaurant. However, when they called the restaurant later, they found out that Kenneth had not arrived there at the expected time. Brenda was uncertain about what time Kenneth returned home or whether he had gone to the restaurant at all. The next morning, he came back with a deep, fresh scratch on his face that was still bleeding. When Brenda asked him about it, he replied that it was none of her business. He quickly changed his clothes, took a shower, and left for a court appointment. When Kenneth returned from court regarding an assault case, Brenda informed him that the police were already investigating at their home. Kenneth was very upset about this and told Brenda that if the police asked her about him, she should say he hadn't lived there for about a month. After the investigation stalled, they relocated and waited a bit to avoid drawing attention to their escape. Brenda attempted to inquire about the incident with Kenneth, but he brushed off her concerns, stating that it was none of her business. However, one night, while drunk, he revealed that he had interacted with a German woman to take her money. Kenneth's testimony was contradicted by his time card, which showed he arrived at work on time and left only at 9 a.m. Brenda's statements also conflicted with the fact that Kenneth spoke to the police when he returned home and had no visible scratches on his face. Brenda's suspicions seemed unfounded. She could simply be a scorned ex seeking revenge on Kenneth. To clarify the situation, she was offered a polygraph test, which she took and passed. The detectives then decided to conduct a further investigation into Kenneth's background. They found another ex-girlfriend who claimed that Kenneth had also confessed to murdering a German woman, whom he referred to casually. Despite this new testimony, there was still little evidence against him. The fingerprints found on the toaster and faucet in the kitchen where Katrina died did not match Kenneth. This investigation took place in 1982, before DNA testing was available. To eliminate any doubts, they compared Kenneth's blood type with the blood found at the scene, and they matched it. The detectives viewed this as solid evidence of Kenneth's guilt, despite the low accuracy of such comparisons. It appeared that the prosecutor was eager to close the case quickly and needed someone to blame. Given the personal nature of the crime and its brutality, the police decided to thoroughly search for a possible motive. Kenneth had a difficult childhood that significantly shaped his life. He harbored a long-standing dislike for Katrina, feeling resentful towards her and her children. They all grew up together, and Katrina's children often boasted about their pocket money, which upset Kenneth because his family struggled financially. One day, driven by frustration, Kenneth and his sister broke into Katrina's house, stealing sweets and money from her children's piggy bank. At that time, Kenneth was only 10 years old. Katrina was understandably furious and insisted on taking action against him for his unacceptable behavior. Then, Kenneth was taken from his family and placed in a juvenile correctional facility at age 10. There, he faced harsh conditions alongside older teens who had committed more serious offenses. Kenneth found this experience traumatic and rarely spoke about it, yet he held a deep resentment towards Katrina for her role in his imprisonment. Despite the hostility he faced from others, his sister, Betty Ann, supported him. Although she was younger, Betty was very close to Kenneth and always believed he was innocent. Despite Betty's support, Kenneth was arrested 2 years after Katrina's tragic death and charged with her murder. The hearing was set for 1983. Kenneth remained calm about the upcoming trial, confident in his alibi, which was supported by a timesheet. However, from the very beginning, the odds were stacked against him. His former girlfriend, Brenda, testified against him, sharing even more information than before. She claimed to have been in close contact with a friend of Katrina's who had previously dated Kenneth. Catherine's friend stated that Kenneth had given her a ring a few months after Catherine's death. Upon seeing the ring, Brenda realized it resembled one she had seen on Katrina before the murder. Photos of the ring were presented as evidence during the trial. The prosecution utilized clever tactics and presented various pieces of circumstantial evidence. Kenneth's lawyer believed he had a good chance of avoiding a conviction and advised him not to testify in his own defense. However, when it was time to present evidence of Kenneth's innocence, the timesheet had mysteriously disappeared. Without it, and relying only on his family's claims that he was a good person, there was no substantial proof to support his innocence. Consequently, Kenneth Walters was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The defense argued that Kenneth was fortunate that the state did not have the death penalty, otherwise, he would have faced execution. Kenneth maintained his innocence and requested a retrial, but only his sister Betty supported him. Others believed she was too emotionally attached and forgave him for his past mistakes. His history of wrongdoings influenced the jury's decision against him. Initially, his lawyer believed in his innocence and worked diligently to exonerate him. However, all appeals were denied. As time passed, the lawyer's enthusiasm dwindled. Kenneth lost the opportunity to have his case reconsidered and was left to serve a life sentence in prison. His family believed his imprisonment was due to his lack of financial resources. He could not afford a skilled lawyer. After all his appeals were turned down, no attorney wanted to take on his case. Kenneth accepted his fate, but Betty remained determined. She frequently visited him in prison and continued to believe in his innocence, steadfastly pursuing justice on his behalf. Kenneth had a difficult personality and frequently caused problems in prison, which made it hard for anyone to make excuses for his behavior. He even tried to end his life out of despair. During one visit, Betty was unable to see him because he was in solitary confinement after getting into a fight with another inmate. Once he was released from solitary, they were able to meet, and Betty had a heartfelt conversation with him, expressing her determination to help him get out of prison. Their trust in lawyers had faded, especially since many refused to take on Kenneth's case. Betty felt she could only rely on herself. At that time, she hadn't completed high school and lacked the necessary education. She had also divorced her husband, who had discouraged her from helping Kenneth. As a single mother of 2, she worked as a waitress, struggling to support herself and her children, but she remained committed to helping Kenneth. Betty first focused on finishing high school and then enrolled in college. She managed to balance her night shifts as a waitress while raising her kids. Despite the challenges, her determination and strong feelings propelled her forward. Betty eventually became a lawyer, fully knowledgeable about Kenneth's case but puzzled about how his timesheet went missing. Additionally, she discovered that Brenda, who reported a large scratch on Kenneth's face the day Katrina was murdered, had lied, as Kenneth had been in court, then at a restaurant, and later speaking with detectives. Those reports did not mention any injuries on Kenneth. It was odd that no one else noticed the scratch. Detectives typically pay close attention to such details, especially since Kenneth was one of the suspects from the beginning. Betty continuously reviewed the evidence and found substantial confirmation of her suspicions. Furthermore, she learned that Brenda did not actually take a polygraph test. Instead, Brenda only passed a voice test, which can indicate lies but is less reliable than a polygraph. Kenneth successfully passed the lie detector test, which should have worked in his favor, but this detail was not mentioned during the trial. As Betty investigated the circumstances surrounding Kenneth's conviction, she increasingly realized that law enforcement had seemingly chosen him as a scapegoat. Brenda went to the police after realizing that Kenneth had received a life sentence and admitted that she had lied under pressure from Robert, who hoped to gain financially. She also desired revenge on her ex, Kenneth, and felt pressured by the police. Now, she regretted that her actions had led to an innocent man being imprisoned for life. Another ex-girlfriend also revealed that she testified against Kenneth due to pressure from a female police officer who had a personal bias against him and was intent on seeing him convicted. It wasn't until 1999 that Betty gained access to significant evidence, specifically DNA samples collected from the crime scene. She uncovered a box of documents and samples, including blood and hair, that had never been analyzed before. The examination revealed that the DNA from the crime scene did not match Kenneth's. However, both law enforcement and the public worked to prevent the case from being reopened, while Katrina's family strongly resisted any new investigation. In 2000, Betty successfully reached out to the Innocence Project, a group of lawyers dedicated to assisting wrongfully convicted individuals. This organization had a team of experts and the resources needed to conduct thorough investigations. Betty presented evidence proving Kenneth's innocence, convincing the project to take on his case. She also contacted a female police officer involved in the investigation, who had a questionable reputation and had previously compromised her credibility in another case. Many in law enforcement spoke poorly of her, raising suspicions that she had intentionally framed Kenneth and had not lost key evidence by chance. Furthermore, inconsistencies in the testimonies of Kenneth's former girlfriends were exposed, particularly regarding a ring that was shown to the jury. It was discovered that the ring had been sent to Germany and did not match the jewelry owned by Kenneth's ex-girlfriend. It was smaller and unsuitable for Katrina. Betty sought to find the ring to counter another piece of evidence against Kenneth. She learned that the ring had initials engraved on it that did not belong to Katrina. Ultimately, due to Betty's extensive efforts in uncovering these discrepancies, the case was reopened, and the prosecutor dropped the charges against Kenneth. After spending 18 years, 5 months, and 10 days in prison, Kenneth was finally acquitted and became a free man. He was able to enjoy life again after being deprived of it for so long. Unfortunately, tragedy struck. On September 19, 2001, while visiting his brother's house, Kenneth decided to take a shortcut that required him to climb over a tall wall. He did not realize the wall on the other side was even higher. When he jumped from a height of 15 feet, he fell awkwardly, struck his head, and later died in the hospital. Betty, Kenneth's sister, remembered that those 6 months after his release were the happiest of his life. After so many years in prison, everything felt new to him. Even after his death, Betty continued to fight for justice. In 2004, she filed a lawsuit against the city for the wrongful imprisonment of Kenneth and the impact it had on their lives. By 2009, she successfully won the case, receiving $10.5 million in compensation. In this story, Katrina's murder case remains unsolved and often forgotten. The blood found at the crime scene was tested, but no matches were found in the police database. The identity of the person who brutally took her life remains unknown. Her family hopes that one day, the case will be solved. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Fernando Pastorizo. A young couple in love found themselves in a toxic relationship that ended in tragedy. The investigation revealed that the situation was more complicated than it appeared, with disturbing secrets emerging. Nahir Galarza was born on September 11, 1998, in Gualeguaychú, Argentina, a city of about 100,000 residents known for its vibrant carnivals and its proximity to Uruguay. From a young age, Nahir was sociable and cheerful. She had a younger brother, who was 3 years her junior. Unlike Nahir, her younger brother faced developmental challenges and struggled with learning, eventually receiving a diagnosis of a disability. Nahir excelled in school and found learning languages easy. Their family was considered exemplary and happy, maintaining a well-organized home life. Their mother emphasized cleanliness, and Nahir developed a strong obsession with order, tidiness, and the habit of washing hands regularly. Her father was a police officer, and while the parents were strict, they indulged their children. Nahir aspired to become a lawyer, and after finishing high school, enrolled in the law program at Concepción del Uruguay University. She was also passionate about sports, play field hockey, engaging in daily training and massages to stay fit, and she enjoyed a vibrant social life filled with friends and parties. In 2012, when she was 14, Nahir met 15-year-old Fernando Gabriel Pastorizo at a bowling alley. Fernando, born on January 3, 1997, in Gualeguaychú, Argentina, was a cheerful and active young man from a respectable family who loved animals. This caught Nahir's attention, and they began dating. However, their relationship was tumultuous, characterized by frequent arguments and breakups that would be resolved just a few days later. Both were jealous and suspicious, which fueled their conflicts. In 2016, they went on a family trip to Brazil, during which they managed to enjoy their time together with hardly any disputes. It seemed like their relationship was improving, but issues continued to arise, and they still had cycles of arguing, breaking up, and reconciling. On Christmas Eve 2017, both Nahir and Fernando attended a party, but they arrived separately with their friends after having fought earlier. During the party, a brawl broke out between Fernando and another guy. The exact reason for the fight remains unclear, as Nahir, Fernando, and their friends provided conflicting explanations. Fernando claimed he was severely beaten, while Nahir stated that Fernando became jealous of her and started the altercation with the guy. On December 28, 2017, Nahir went for a massage. After her session, she discovered that her phone was dead. Remembering that she had left her charger at Fernando's home, she decided to go there and stayed the night. The next morning, Fernando drove her home on his motorcycle. Unfortunately, at dawn, a taxi driver discovered Fernando bleeding and called the police and an ambulance. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. Fernando had died. The police discovered that he had been attacked twice near his motorcycle. News of the incident spread quickly, and at 7 a.m., Nahir, just waking up, learned about it. She posted a picture of them together on her social media, writing, "5 years together, quarrels and breakups, reconciliations, but always with love. I love you forever, my angel." Fernando's mother called Nahir to ask what had happened, but Nahir was unsure. Meanwhile, the police began gathering evidence at the crime scene and launched a murder investigation. Initially, they thought it might be a robbery, but this theory was ruled out since Fernando's money had not been taken. The area was typically calm and safe, with a low crime rate, raising questions about who could have killed Fernando and why. Investigators discovered that Fernando had been attacked with a 9mm pistol, a type of weapon usually used by police. This raised suspicions that a police officer might be involved. It was established that Fernando was first shot from behind at close range, likely by someone who approached him unnoticed. The assailant then moved in closer and shot him in the heart. Could the attacker have been someone he knew? This possibility was reinforced by the discovery of a second helmet at the scene. The police began reviewing surveillance footage from the area and saw a girl leaving the scene at 5:22 a.m., but her face was not visible. Nahir soon became a suspect and was summoned to the police station for questioning. During the interview, she confidently claimed that Fernando had driven her home that night. She stated that she showered, went to bed, and later woke up to the news of the tragedy. She expressed her sorrow for Fernando in a social media post. Nahir appeared very distressed and was crying, leading the investigators to have no further questions for her. The police decided to interrogate Nahir's father, Marcelo Galarza, who is a police officer. He initially claimed he didn't know anyone named Fernando, but this was later proven false when photos from their trip to Brazil surfaced, showing them together. It became clear that Nahir's father was well acquainted with Fernando, leading to questions about why he lied. The police began to suspect that he might be involved in the crime, prompting his denial of knowing Fernando. They developed a theory that pointed to Marcelo's involvement, especially after discovering evidence related to a weapon. Forensic tests confirmed that this weapon belonging to Nahir's father was the weapon used to kill Fernando, making him the main suspect. Investigators considered possible motives, suspecting that he may have disliked Fernando because of his daughter's relationship with Fernando, which might have led to a confrontation that ended fatally. Then came a surprising twist. Nahir confessed to killing Fernando to protect her father, who was on the verge of being arrested. She claimed that Fernando had subjected her to physical violence, alleging that on the night of the incident, he had grabbed her hair and dragged her home, prompting her to attack him. However, questions arose about how she obtained a weapon for this act. It became evident that this was a premeditated action, as she had brought a weapon with her. Nahir had stolen her father's service pistol, which he kept in the fridge, and returned it after the murder, leaving her parents completely unaware. She was recorded on surveillance footage. When the police questioned her about why she fled and attempted to hide evidence, not contacting the police or an ambulance if she was innocent, Nahir explained that she was confused. At that moment, she didn't believe Fernando would die and didn't grasp the seriousness of the situation. Upon realizing that she had killed him, she became very distressed. Her friends and Fernando's friends provided conflicting accounts. Nahir's friends blamed Fernando, citing her frequent complaints about him, while his friends accused Nahir. Some even noted that their relationship was difficult to define, as they spent more time apart than together. Nahir had 5 other boyfriends, and Fernando likely had other girlfriends as well. Their messages were examined, revealing that Fernando appeared to be more of a victim in their relationship. Nahir was aggressive and threatened him, while the kind-hearted Fernando confided in friends about being physically abused when he tried to break up with her. He was exhausted from the relationship and sought a peaceful life without her. This may have motivated Nahir to kill him, driven by a desire for revenge over his wish to end their relationship. Later, Nahir claimed that she accidentally attacked Fernando while she was holding the weapon. She stated that they both fell off the motorcycle, and that was when the gun fired for the first time. After this, she picked up the weapon and accidentally shot him again. This explanation seemed highly unlikely. A ballistic expert stated that it was impossible for there to be 2 accidental shots. Even if the first shot was an accident, the second shot was definitely intentional. Surveillance footage showed her walking home at a normal pace, covering more than 20 blocks, which contradicted her claim of being in shock and confusion after the accidental attacking. A handwriting expert analyzed Nahir's writing and found that she displayed significant emotional instability, along with self-centered and manipulative traits. Her handwriting indicated egocentrism, a craving for attention, mood swings, impulsiveness, aggressiveness, a tendency to lie, and a desire for dominance and manipulation. Her handwriting also revealed that she was experiencing considerable emotional turmoil. Nahir was more complicated than she initially appeared. She had a contradictory, complex, pushy, and aggressive personality. It was discovered that at the age of 16, she had pulled a prank on her parents by faking her own kidnapping, leaving them terrified and shocked when they realized it was a joke. Before the trial, she underwent a psychiatric evaluation. The psychiatrist reported that she exhibited complete narcissism, was quick to anger, aggressive, and showed no remorse for her actions. Besides, she was diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, which was linked to her desire for control. During the trial, Nahir displayed defiant behavior. She arrived in shorts, looked down on others with arrogance, frequently adjusted her hair, and flirted with those around her. Although she maintained that her actions were in self-defense, nobody found her story credible. Her father initially supported her, but later distanced himself from her. There was no evidence indicating that Nahir had experienced physical abuse from Fernando. The prosecution outlined the following events. Around 2 a.m., Fernando was driving Nahir home. Upon arriving, they entered an apartment and argued for about 2 hours. Fernando wanted to end their relationship, but Nahir disagreed. During this time, she secretly took her father's weapon, and they left for another location. While traveling down a dark, deserted street, Nahir asked Fernando to stop. She got off the motorcycle, attacked him in the back, and when he fell, she attacked him again. Afterward, she returned home. Once there, she took a shower to clean off the blood and gun residue from her hands, returned her father's gun to the fridge, changed her clothes, and went to sleep. On July 3, 2018, Nahir Galarza was found guilty of aggravated murder and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 35 years. This means she could be released when she is 54 years old. At 19, Nahir has become the youngest person in Argentina to receive a life sentence. She has filed 3 appeals against her conviction, but all have been denied, leaving the sentence unchanged. At this time, Nahir changed her statement. She claims that she is not guilty at all, and her father is the real killer, as he attacked Fernando. One interesting thing is that there is surveillance footage showing Nahir at home during the time of the murder, raising questions about her alibi. Her mother, Yamina Crow, who divorced Nahir's father, supports her daughter and believes in her innocence. Nahir has stated that she was afraid of her father and her uncle, who abused her, which led her to take the blame for the crime. She expresses concern for her mother and brother's safety. Nahir has also filed a lawsuit against her uncle. The case has attracted significant public attention, with mixed reactions from the community. Some people are indifferent, while others support Nahir and believe she is innocent. Conversely, some argue that she not only killed Fernando, but also ruined her own life. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Megan Hargan. In 1983, Steve and Pamela Hargan welcomed their first daughter Megan, and 2 years later, their second daughter Ashley was born. Almost 8 years later, in 1993, they had another daughter, Helen. However, tensions within the family began to rise. Steve and Pamela started to argue, which ultimately led to their divorce while the girls were still young. Pamela received custody of the daughters, and soon after, she and the girls relocated to Potomac, Maryland. Pamela loves and cares for her daughters as well as for her work. She worked for a decade as a human resources manager before advancing to vice president at a large company. Neighbors noted that her daughters got along well and often played in their backyard with their pets. Due to her job requiring travel both domestically and internationally, eldest daughter Megan helped her mother raise her youngest sister Helen. Pamela's career peaked when her company merged with an international scientific applications corporation, resulting in a significant increase in her income. Despite this, she remained very diligent in her charity work and regularly donated part of her income to help people in difficult circumstances. She also provided generously for her family, ensuring her daughters had everything they wanted. Thanks to her professional success, Pamela was able to purchase a stunning property worth millions in a trendy area of Fairfax County, Virginia. The family's lifestyle was enviable, and Pamela took pride in her daughters, serving as a role model for others. However, they also faced envy from some. Beneath their seemingly perfect life, the family encountered common issues. As the girls grew older, a rivalry developed between them. Pamela noticed that Megan was facing the most difficulties due to her parents' divorce. This led her to develop feelings of jealousy and resentment towards her younger sister, Helen. She expressed her frustration by accusing their mother, Pamela, of favoring Helen. Her resentment deepened after Helen graduated high school and, like their mother, enrolled at the University of Dallas in 2014. At university, Helen became friends with a young woman named Erin. Initially, Erin viewed Helen as a modest and shy girl who rarely smiled. However, as they got to know each other better, they formed a close friendship. Erin discovered that Helen was actually a kind and sincere person dedicated to her studies. Despite her family's wealth and good standing, Helen took a part-time job as a waitress at a restaurant near the university. It was there that she met Carlos Gutierrez, a 30-year-old from Texas. They quickly started dating, becoming nearly inseparable. In 2017, Helen's middle sister, Ashley, got married at the age of 32 and moved out of the family home. Megan, the eldest sister, also married at 34, to Frank, a man from West Virginia, and they had a daughter named Molly. When Frank went to serve in the military, Pamela welcomed Megan and Molly into her home, allowing them to stay as long as needed. That same year, Helen graduated from university. Although she had intended to move in with Carlos, she returned to Pamela's home in Virginia, where her older sister Megan and 6-year-old niece Molly were living. At that point, Pamela was pleased with her accomplishments and, at 63, intended to retire. She decided to renovate a house she planned to buy for her youngest daughter, Helen, in Northern Virginia. This decision upset Megan, who had always felt that her mother favored her younger sister. Over time, the relationship between the sisters, Megan and Helen, became very strained. Tamara North, the sister of Pamela and the girl's aunt, later confirmed this. She noted that Megan harbored feelings of resentment towards Helen. Having cared for Helen since she was a child, Tamara observed that Megan was unwilling to acknowledge her younger sister. Unlike Ashley, Megan refused to help care for Helen from the moment she was born and would not play with her. Although the rivalry was clear, no one could have predicted that this mix of jealousy, envy, and later greed would lead to a tragic outcome. On the evening of July 14, 2017, the neighbors of Pamela quickly realized something was wrong when they saw the Fairfax County Police arriving at the estate. The emergency call had come from Carlos, Helen's boyfriend, who was in Dallas, Texas, and far from the scene. He expressed concern for Helen's well-being after she had called him with a strange story about a shooting. When the police arrived at the building, it was already too late. Upon inspecting the premises, they discovered the body of Pamela lying face down in the bathroom, covered with a blanket. It was evident that she had suffered a fatal head injury. Moving to the second floor of the spacious house, they found Helen in her bathroom. She was sitting on the toilet, with a weapon between her legs and pointed upwards. It appeared that after killing her mother, Helen had ended her life by using her socked toe to pull the trigger after removing her shoe. As the investigation progressed, detectives realized that their initial hypothesis might not be correct. A family secret began to come to light. Officers secured the area around the house and interviewed neighbors. Detective Brian Byerson, who was leading the case, reached out to Steve, Pamela's ex-husband, to inform him of the tragic events. Overwhelmed with grief, Steve immediately called his other two daughters, Ashley and Megan. Megan, the oldest sister, said she was driving her daughter to West Virginia, but immediately turned around to go to her family's house. When Ashley and Megan arrived, both sisters were in shock and crying while speaking with the police. They both believed that Helen had ended her life, especially Megan. She recalled that when she left the house at 1:30 p.m., with her daughter Pamela and Helen were angry. She noted that both Pamela and Helen were very upset. Helen was particularly distressed because their mother had stopped helping her buy a house. Pamela, their mother, disapproved of Helen's relationship with Carlos and did not want Helen to move in with him. Besides, Megan said that Helen had been feeling angry and depressed for the past few months. During questioning, Ashley confirmed that Helen had previously faced emotional issues and had once talked about self-harm. Ashley also mentioned that their mother, Pamela, suspected Helen of using banned substances and wanted to seek help for her. A weapon found next to Helen confirmed that it belonged to Megan's husband, Frank. He had brought the weapon to Pamela's house because he had seen two suspicious men nearby a few days before the tragedy occurred. He requested that the police examine Megan for gunpowder residue on her hands. This was particularly important because Carlos's earlier statement had led the police in a different direction in their investigation. To uncover the truth, they needed to gather all available evidence, regardless of how confusing or insignificant it might seem, until the full story emerged. After a thorough investigation that lasted over a year, the lab confirmed the presence of gunpowder residue on Megan's hands, indicating that she had recently used a weapon. An autopsy revealed that Pamela had been shot twice, while Helen had only suffered one bullet wound. However, it was determined that the path of this bullet to Helen's neck was at an angle inconsistent with a self-inflicted gunshot. During the investigation at the scene, detectives noticed several unusual details. Pamela's phone was found on top of the blanket covering her, which seemed unnatural. Furthermore, no fingerprints were found on Helen's phone, despite the fact that she had called and texted Carlos before her death. There was also a small amount of blood on the weapon, raising suspicion since she should have had more blood if she had ended her life. This suggests that someone else pulled the trigger. Additionally, Megan's DNA was found in the bag with the weapon, which could be explained by her having brought the weapon into the house and handled it. Investigators discovered documents detailing Pamela's bank accounts and passwords, but these could not be used as evidence because they were not included in the search warrant. The day after the incident, Megan was allowed access to the property and belongings. When police conducted another search later, they included the albums and documents in their report, but they could not find them, indicating that someone had removed them. The strongest evidence against Megan, apart from Carlos's testimony and the police's suspicions, came from her own actions. Detectives found that just days before her mother and younger sister were killed, she was trying to buy a house for herself. She claimed she had her mother's financial help to close the deal, but in reality, she frequently changed jobs and had only $30 in her bank account. On the day of the murders, Megan needed to deposit over $400,000 to secure the purchase of her dream home. Court documents revealed that Megan was struggling financially and had tried to illegally transfer $420,000 from her mother's bank account, Pamela. Her plan was thwarted when Pamela's bank alerted her about the attempted transfer, prompting her to freeze the funds. This information was reported to the detectives by the finance department of the company, which became suspicious of the transaction and later learned about Pamela's death 5 days afterward. After the murder, Megan was called in for questioning again and was informed about the results of a fraudulent money withdrawal. Initially, she said that Pamela had wanted to transfer the funds. However, her story changed when investigators presented a recording of her conversation, and she admitted to calling the bank. Despite this, she continued to deny any involvement in her mother and younger sister's deaths. Investigators uncovered further evidence that Megan was responsible for the deaths of her mother and sister, and that she staged the incident to make it appear that Helen had killed their mother before ending her life. According to the investigators, Megan's motivation was jealousy. She felt that her mother favored her younger sister, which had troubled her throughout her life. When their wealthy and successful mother offered to buy Helen her own house, but refused to do the same for Megan, this left Megan feeling depressed and hopeless. Consumed by envy, resentment, and a desire for money, she was driven to commit these acts. The police believe that Megan had premeditated a double murder. 2 days before the incident, she spoke about suspicious men in their neighborhood, seemingly to explain the presence of the weapon in her home. Megan contacted the police to report the presence of strangers in the area. She also said that many other neighbors had similar concerns. On November 9, 2018, nearly a year and a half after Pamela and Helen's deaths, Megan was arrested at her new home in West Virginia, which she had purchased following the incident. The police held a morning press conference to announce her arrest. Detectives from the Serious Crimes Unit stated that Megan faced 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of using a weapon during the commission of the murders. Detective Brian Byerson reported that during a search of Megan's apartment, investigators uncovered crucial evidence, including a spreadsheet containing bank details and account passwords. These details were originally found in Pamela's house, but later vanished under mysterious circumstances. Megan has now appeared in court to face charges for the murders of her younger sister and mother. The final hearings in this controversial case occurred in March 2022. Alongside a significant amount of circumstantial evidence gathered by the prosecutors, one key factor in securing a conviction was the compelling testimony of Carlos Gutierrez. Carlos struggled to control his emotions as he continued his testimony. He explained that he asked Helen to leave the house, but she expressed concern for her niece Molly, who was also inside. Carlos could hear the fear in her voice over the phone, realizing how terrified she was in that moment. During subsequent calls, Helen mentioned that she could hear her mother, Pamela, dying. It seemed that Helen was following Carlos's advice to hide in a safe place, but when Carlos tried to reach her an hour later, she did not answer. Worried, he called 911 to report the situation. However, since he was in Texas, the operator informed him that they needed to contact local authorities first. After multiple calls to different numbers, Carlos finally managed to report that someone had died at the specified address and that he feared for Helen's safety. The prosecutor's office reported that Megan attacked Helen at 1 p.m. Around 1:15 p.m., Megan took Helen's phone and pretended to be her to reassure Carlos, claiming that she was fine. Ashley, the middle sister who was pregnant, also testified. She expressed regret that her son would grow up without knowing his grandmother and aunt, and that she could never have imagined that a killer was in their home. Megan's defense maintained that Helen was the one who killed Pamela and then ended her life, insisting that Megan was innocent. They argued that the police initially accepted this version, stating that Helen attacked their mother in the head after becoming upset when her mother changed her mind about buying her a house. After 13 days of trial, on March 28, 2022, Megan Hargan, who is 39 years old, was found guilty of murdering her mother, Pamela Hargan, and her younger sister, Helen Hargan, on July 14, 2017. The jury recommended a sentence of 20 years to life in prison for each murder. During the sentencing hearing in October, the judge sentenced Megan to 2 life terms in prison, following the jury's recommendations. However, on November 9, 2022, a judge overturned her double murder conviction due to juror misconduct. This decision was made after it was discovered that one juror attempted to recreate how Helen might have ended her life. The prosecutor announced plans to retry Megan for the crimes, and she remains in custody awaiting the new trial. In September 2023, Megan Hargan was tried and convicted a second time for the murder of her mother and younger sister. She was sentenced to life in prison in January 2024. After the verdict was announced, a trembling Megan leaned on her lawyer for support, while her younger sister Ashley burst into tears. Other family members of the Hargan family, present in the courtroom, embraced each other and wept after the trial. Ashley chose not to comment and preferred to keep her future plans private. Megan and her husband have divorced, and their daughter is now living with her father in West Virginia. This case highlights how jealousy and conflict among siblings can escalate if not addressed early. Such tensions can arise from minor issues and may grow into deep-seated animosity, threatening the bonds between children and parents. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Itaberli Lozano. Itaberli Lozano was the son of Tatiana Ferreira Lozano Pereira. After divorcing Itaberli's father, Tatiana got married to Alex Pereira. Together, Tatiana and Alex had another child. People who knew the family described them as quiet and unproblematic. Tatiana worked as a manager at a local supermarket, and her eldest son, Itaberli, lived with her. He was considered a polite and well-behaved boy who enjoyed spending his free time listening to music with his friends. The situation worsened when, at the age of 14, Itaberli confided to his mother that he was different from other boys and was not attracted to girls. From that moment on, his mother often ridiculed him, and their arguments became increasingly frequent. By the end of 2016, their relationship had deteriorated significantly, and Tatiana began physically abusing her son. The day after Christmas, Itaberli shared several posts on Facebook describing his difficult home life. He included a photo of himself with his mother, stepfather, and younger brother. In the post, he wrote mainly about his family. He also shared other photos showing bloody cuts and scrapes on his face, back, chest, and arms. In the comments, Itaberli revealed that his mother had beaten him and kicked him out of the house because he was different from other children. In the post, Itaberli mentioned that he was staying with a friend because his mother had ordered the children in their neighborhood to attack him. A few days later, he returned to his mother's house, but the arguments continued. One day, his mother beat him again, forcing him to run away. This time, he went to his grandmother's house, where he finally found safety. His paternal family welcomed and accepted him. His mother, Tatiana, called him several times, urging him to return home before December 29, claiming that she wanted to make up with him before New Year's Eve. However, his uncle, Dario Rosa, and other family members did not agree to let Itaberli return to his mother. They doubted Tatiana's sincerity and suspected that she might endanger the boy. Despite their warnings, Itaberli was happy that his mother seemed willing to mend their relationship. Hoping to improve things with her, he left his grandmother's house, unaware that a trap awaited him. Tatiana had devised a cruel plan to teach her son a lesson. She hired two young men, Victor Roberto da Silva and Miller da Silva Barisa, to attack him. When Itaberli arrived home, Victor and Miller entered the room while Tatiana was present and attacked him. Itaberli screamed for help, pleading with his mother, but she stood by, unmoved, until he collapsed. Tatiana's plan did not end there. When she found her son unconscious, she instructed the young men to kill him, but they refused. Determined to resolve what she saw as her son's unconventional tendencies, Tatiana went into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and attacked him. Victor and Miller, horrified by what they witnessed, fled the house. Tatiana then went into the bedroom, where her husband was sleeping, and woke him up to help her dispose of the body. Together, they wrapped the body in a blanket, put it in the car, and drove to a remote, sparsely populated area with thick reeds along the road. There, they abandoned the body and returned home to clean up the scene. The next day, the couple returned to the location, doused the body with gasoline, and burned it to prevent identification. From that day on, Itaberli's paternal relatives could no longer contact him. As time passed, his grandmother became increasingly worried. He did not call to update her on his reconciliation with his mother. She had expected him to join her for the New Year celebrations, as they had planned to celebrate together. With no news from Itaberli, she asked his uncle to take her to Tatiana's house to inquire about Itaberli. When they arrived at Tatiana's house, they found her calm. She explained that her son was not home because he had gone to a friend's house, and she had no further information about him. His grandmother was unsure whether to believe Tatiana or call the police. However, after several hours of being unable to contact her grandson, she decided to get the police involved. Itaberli's grandmother believed that her grandson would not disappear without informing her, especially since they had planned to spend the holidays together. She was convinced that something serious had happened and felt an investigation was necessary. She shared all her suspicions with the police. Itaberli's uncle Dario mentioned the strained relationship between Tatiana and her son. Furthermore, when questioned, Tatiana appeared surprisingly calm about the situation. Her lack of concern and failure to report her son missing raised suspicions. The police began an investigation, focusing primarily on Tatiana. A few days later, on January 7, 2017, a patrol discovered the burned body of a young man wrapped up and left in a rural area of São Paulo. The body had deep stab wounds, and an intact bracelet was found nearby. Police suspected the body was that of Itaberli, who had recently been reported missing. They notified the boy's grandmother, who identified the bracelet as her grandson's. However, this alone was not sufficient to confirm the identity of the body. Investigators requested the Institute of Forensic Medicine to conduct a DNA test using genetic material from the boy's mother. Forensic experts determined that the victim had died approximately 10 days earlier. Police also concluded that the location where the body was discovered was not the crime scene, as no evidence was found there. On January 11, police searched Tatiana's home and discovered bloodstains on the sofa, bed, and walls. They also found 2 kitchen knives with bloodstains, suspected to be the murder weapons. Tatiana and her husband Alex were arrested. Confronted with the evidence and unable to deny it, Tatiana confessed to killing her eldest son, but provided a completely different version of events. She claimed that on the day she intended to reconcile with Itaberli, he came home drunk and aggressive. According to Tatiana, he attacked her, her husband, and their 4-year-old son. Tatiana alleged that she and her husband acted in self-defense, killing their son because they believed he was a threat to their family. Out of fear, they disposed of the boy's body. However, the police did not believe this testimony. Contradictions in Tatiana's and Alex's accounts revealed that both were lying. Statements from relatives about Itaberli starkly contrasted with those of his mother. Tatiana described her son as problematic, accusing him of using illegal drugs, drinking excessively, avoiding work, and being disliked by the community. However, neighbors and acquaintances who knew Itaberli and his paternal family described him as responsible, kind, considerate, polite, and well-liked. He also maintained a close circle of friends and avoided alcohol or drugs. The police gathered additional evidence linking Tatiana and Alex to Itaberli's murder. A key piece of evidence was an attempt to delete a Facebook post written by Itaberli, in which he mentioned being attacked. Fortunately, some of his friends had saved the post and turned it over to the police. Suddenly, Tatiana changed her story, adding 3 more people to the case: Victor, Miller, and a girl who acted as an intermediary for their communication. In this new version, Tatiana claimed that she had asked the young men to teach her son a lesson because he had threatened and attacked her. However, she alleged that the young men had killed her son without her consent while she was outside the house. She said she heard her son screaming for help, but when she returned, she discovered that the killers had fled. She then woke her husband, and together they disposed of the body. The defense argued that Tatiana had acted out of anger and self-defense, claiming that Itaberli had been aggressive and had previously attacked his mother. However, significant inconsistencies in Tatiana's story cast doubt on her claims. On January 13, the police arrested Victor, Miller, and the girl who had acted as an intermediary between Tatiana and the 2 men. The girl was also a witness to the crime. The testimonies of these young people differed significantly from Tatiana's version of events. According to the girl, Tatiana had confided in her several times that she was extremely angry with her son, whom she described as different from other boys. Tatiana expressed a desire to find someone to beat her son. The girl suggested her boyfriend and his friend, who were willing to do the job for a fee. Tatiana immediately hired them. The girl stated that after Victor and Miller left the house, Tatiana killed Itaberli. She claimed to have witnessed this with her own eyes. seeing Tatiana take a knife and stab her son to death. Victor and Miller shared their version of events. Their testimonies were consistent and the police believed them. They stated that they did not receive any money from Tatiana and confirmed that they were not present at the murder, as they had already left the house by that time. After gathering all the evidence, on February 9, 2017, the prosecutor's office transferred the case to court on charges of murder. Tatiana and Alex were also charged with concealing a corpse. The couple's lawyer argued that Tatiana had acted in self-defense and that Alex had been asleep during the incident. However, the prosecutor contended that the crime was motivated by Tatiana's inability to accept her son's non-traditional tendencies. The court decided to detain Tatiana, Alex, Miller, and Victor. During the criminal proceedings, Tatiana remained in custody, while Alex and the two young men were transferred to the Santa Rosa jail. Following the court's decision to impose detention orders on all the defendants, Tatiana's defense lawyer resigned. A new attorney was appointed to represent her. The new attorney argued that Itaberli had been a problematic child who had previously threatened to harm other family members. The attorney also claimed that Itaberli's aunt had filed 2 complaints against him. However, the county police reported that no such complaints had been filed. The murder, as reported by the media, deeply shocked the community. Itaberli's Facebook page quickly turned into a memorial site, filled with messages of grief and demands for justice. A few days later, the police conducted a reenactment of the crime, during which only Tatiana was present. During the reenactment, Tatiana was temporarily taken back to her home. She recounted the events of that day in detail, explaining how she had taken her son's life and identifying the location where she and her husband had dumped and burned the body. People gathered at the crime scene. Some accused Tatiana of being a heartless and cruel mother, while others came to her defense. Among those defending Tatiana was her mother, Itaberli's grandmother. She asserting that Tatiana had acted in self-defense against her son, whom she described as disobedient and difficult to manage. The police no longer believed these claims, and the number of those opposing Tatiana grew significantly. 7 months after the murder, Itaberli's body was finally returned to the family for a Christian burial during a 2-hour funeral service. Friends of Itaberli gathered at the city cemetery to bid him farewell. Throughout the months of investigation, the police collected numerous statements from the family's neighbors. They confirmed that there were issues within the family, which escalated after Itaberli revealed to his mother that he was different from other boys and that he did not like girls. Many neighbors reported frequent quarrels and incidents of domestic violence. They also claimed that Tatiana often bullied her son, even after he returned home bruised from being beaten by other children. On November 27, 2019, a jury convicted Tatiana Ferreira Lozano Pereira of murder, sentencing her to 25 years and 9 months in prison. Victor Roberto da Silva and Miller da Silva Barisa were each sentenced to 21 years and 8 months in prison for their involvement in the brutal beating and indirect role in causing the death of Itaberli. As for Tatiana's husband, Alex, his trial was postponed. Relatives of Itaberli expressed relief, believing that justice had been served. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Laura Salmon. On May 31, 1984, an elderly farmer named Johnny Muckle came to the Rutherford County Sheriff's Office. He reported that he had been driving through his field and noticed something unusual. As he got closer, he discovered a girl lying dead in the field, her face covered in blood. Alarmed, he immediately contacted the police without disturbing the scene. Several officers, including the sheriff, accompanied him back to the scene where they found the body of a blonde girl. She was wearing only her bra, as the rest of her clothing had been removed. The perpetrator had covered her with 2 pairs of jeans, one for women and one for men, and wrapped a black jacket around her upper body, with one sleeve tied tightly around her neck. The police found the entire scene unusual. They had never encountered anything like it in their many years of service. The autopsy revealed that the victim was clutching her underwear in her right hand, and her jeans were identified as part of her clothing. She had suffered multiple injuries, the most serious of which was to her head. Interestingly, Johnny reported that the girl's body was discovered near an abandoned quarry. This location is known to attract students from nearby educational institutions who often gather there to drink and socialize. It is possible that one of these gatherings ended in a violent incident, which is currently under investigation. While this information guides the investigation, it also expands the list of potential suspects to hundreds of juveniles. In order to focus on more specific suspects, additional data collection and analysis are required. The victim was identified as Laura Salmon, 18, a freshman at Middle Tennessee State University located in her hometown of Murfreesboro. Laura attended Oakland High School, where her mother, Lorene Mackey, taught English. Her parents were divorced at the time. Just days before the incident, Laura had moved in with her father because the school year had ended. She missed him and was going to spend part of the holiday with him. Laura was a kind, attractive, and sociable girl who enjoyed attending lively gatherings. As a young woman, she was crowned Little Miss Murfreesboro and showcased her acting talents in summer plays at the local theater. Laura was also very intelligent, graduating with honors and planning to continue her studies at college to build a solid career. She had started attending the local university in the fall of 1983, just 6 months before the tragic incident. She had just started a relationship with her boyfriend, David Kyle Gilley. Laura was well-liked and had no enemies who wanted to harm her. Police believed she may have been a random murder victim. An autopsy was completed on June 2, 1984. The forensic expert found at least 2 blunt force injuries to her head, likely caused by a rock or similar object. These blows resulted in brain damage. Laura suffered fatal head injuries from the repeated attacks. She lost consciousness and died within 10 minutes, and even immediate medical attention could not save her. Initially, there were concerns about the possibility that Laura had been abused, but the forensic results found no signs of this. However, the expert pointed out that Laura had been consensual in her intimate relations within 24 to 48 hours before the incident. It is believed that she may have had a boyfriend. It is possible the attacker staged the crime scene to mislead the police. Forensic teams collected samples from the clothing covering her body for further analysis. Additionally, tire tracks found in the area could belong to either Laura's car or the attacker's car, prompting the police to examine Laura's vehicle. One of the officers knew Laura. She worked as a cashier at a grocery store he frequented after work. He recognized her car and decided to check the store's parking lot. On June 3, he found Laura's car abandoned in the lot, which was subsequently taken to the lab for examination. When the forensic team examined the interior, they found no fingerprints, not even Laura's. This was unusual, indicating that the car may have been thoroughly cleaned, possibly by the perpetrator. However, they did find dirt in the wheel wells and some hairs of unknown origin under the floor mat. These samples were collected for analysis. The soil found in the wheel wells matched the particles on the floor mats of the driver and passenger areas, and when compared to the materials found at the crime scene, they matched as well. Evidence clearly showed that the tire tracks near the crime scene belonged to Laura's car, suggesting that the killer was not a random stranger, but someone who knew her well, including her workplace. As police gathered and analyzed the information, they interviewed people close to Laura, starting with her mother, Lorene Mackey. Lorene immediately suspected her daughter's boyfriend, David, because she was aware of the toxic nature of their relationship and had never supported it. She described David as jealous and possessive, almost like a stalker. Lorene noted that many of Laura's encounters with David ended in arguments. This was extremely distressing to her, as she felt her daughter was ignoring important warning signs. Despite the efforts of several family members, including Laura's father, they were unable to convince Laura that David was a danger. Tragically, this may have contributed to Laura's early death. At that time, Personal relationship issues were not considered matters for the police to handle. People generally believed that they should resolve such matters themselves. The police spoke with Lorraine's mother and then met with her father and stepmother. Lorraine stated that she had last spoken to Laura on the morning of May 31, just a few days before the body was discovered. On that day, Laura had slept over at her friend Trina's house, and they were together until late at night. On the morning of June 1, the girls slept in and woke up around 9 a.m. They then left. Laura went to work at the store, where she was scheduled to work until lunchtime. Trina was supposed to replace her at 2 p.m., after which Laura planned to check her semester grades and then go swimming at her grandmother's pool. However, when Trina arrived at the store around 1 p.m., she discovered that Laura was not there. Her coworkers said that Laura had taken time off and left early. Laura was wearing the same jeans that were found on her body. Laura's car was discovered at work at 3:30 p.m., which was unusual since she was not there. It is unclear when she arrived because there were no surveillance cameras at that time. Laura's father, Salman, last saw his daughter and confirmed that she was with her friend Trina that day. The two girls had been friends since childhood and worked together at the grocery store. Trina helped piece together the events of May 31 and supported Laura's family's concerns. She knew that Laura was afraid of her boyfriend David because he was harassing her, making him a suspect in Laura's murder. Laura had begun talking to other guys because she wanted to break up with David, but was too afraid to tell him directly. She tried to avoid him to signal that their relationship was over. Laura often expressed feeling unsafe around her ex-boyfriend, who was violent towards her, and her fears were well-founded. David Kyle Gillies' behavior became increasingly cruel, making the situation unacceptable. Several co-workers at the grocery store confirmed that Laura and David had a very bad relationship. Witnesses reported that David would come to the store to accuse Laura of cheating and harass her. He used harsh words and even resorted to hitting Laura. David was very possessive. When questioned at the police station, he claimed that Laura was swimming with her grandmother and that he had not seen her. He did not mention their previous encounter before the incident. Witnesses reported seeing Laura with a man in her car that day. After they left together, Laura's car reappeared in the parking lot, but she was missing. No one saw her arrive or park, suggesting that the killer may have left the car there. The police had no evidence against David, so they released him. Unfortunately, the conversation with him was not recorded. A week later, David was questioned again, this time about the last day he spent with Laura. David said that they had a good time on May 30 and that they had not argued. They left Laura's grandmother's apartment at around 9 p.m. in his car, parked behind a church, and were intimate. He then drove her back to her grandmother's house, and they left at around 2 a.m. in separate cars. David went to work, believing that Laura had returned to her father's house. He left work at 7 a.m. and went straight to bed, waking up at 3 p.m. He claimed that he was home during the murder, and his father supported his alibi. The next interview took place in July. David added to his previous claim that after they were intimate, they used jeans in his car to clean up. This detail seemed odd, and the inconsistencies in his testimony raised suspicions, but there was still no evidence against him. The police worked to piece together a timeline of events leading up to the murder. They discovered that on May 30, Laura had been dancing with a man at a nightclub. It was later revealed that the man was one of Laura's friends and that he had a verified alibi for the time of the murder. A new suspect emerged when a Nashville woman reported being abused. During the attack, the attacker mentioned a woman named Laura, threatening to hurt her like he did Laura if she resisted or reported him. During the investigation, police discovered that the suspect also attended the same college as Laura, frequented the gym where she worked out, and often saw her at campus parties. He was also near the school on the day of the murder. Police compared hair found in Laura's car to that of the new suspect. However, DNA analysis at the time was insufficient to make a definitive match. The new suspect was eventually ruled out because the hair samples found in Laura's car did not match him, and he had a solid alibi. As the investigation continued to stall, Laura's parents grew increasingly concerned that the search for the killer might be stalled as well. Concerns about the investigation were confirmed over time due to several police errors. The crime scene was not properly secured, and police collected evidence without using gloves, which could have contaminated it. When Laura's father arrived at the area where his daughter's body was found, he noticed her necklace, which the police had overlooked. He took it to the police station, further cementing his belief that the police had been careless in their investigation. Sadly, Laura's family was right. It took 16 years for the investigation to progress. The case became one of many unsolved cold cases. It wasn't until 2000 that a police team was formed to reinvestigate Laura's case and finally identify her killer. For police officer Dan Goodwin, it was a personal matter because he knew Laura. They had been in college together and had gone to the movies with friends just 4 days before her death. During his first meeting with Laura's family, Goodwin promised to uncover the truth behind her death. Eventually, the police gained access to advanced technology that allowed them to re-examine old evidence. They sent the clothing found on Laura's body to a lab to create a DNA profile. While reviewing Laura's file, the police found a note that contradicted the alibi of Laura's ex-boyfriend, David Kyle Gilley, who claimed he was home at the time of Laura's murder. It was discovered that the police had a witness who contradicted David's alibi. During this time, David's stepfather insisted that he was home, but a woman reported seeing him in a car near the field where Laura's body was found. The woman was located and reinterrogated, confirming her previous account from years earlier and providing the police with fairly accurate details. She stated that the young man she saw driving Laura's car that day had a blank expression on his face and closely resembled the photo of David that had appeared in the newspaper at the time of the murder. In the new investigation, police spoke to Laura's friends, who described David's anxious behavior after the incident. They noted that he appeared to have no remorse for Laura's death and even spoke arrogantly about her. A new witness revealed that at a party, David confessed to her that he had committed the murder during a private conversation. He had threatened her and expressed a desire to attack her, warning that he would harm her if she did not comply. Fortunately, another friend intervened and scared David away. Meanwhile, forensic experts tested the evidence on the clothing and discovered that the blood was Laura's. The only remaining question was about the semen found on the jeans. They needed a biological sample from David for comparison. Unfortunately, he had moved away, so the police began looking for him. David had relocated to Florida in 1986. He was twice divorced, had a daughter, and worked for the Department of Public Works. David also had a criminal record that included abuse, attempted burglary, and resisting arrest, fitting the profile of someone who might have harmed Laura. After meeting with the police, David significantly changed his story. He denied being intimate with Laura the day before the murder and claimed that he had never been jealous or used physical violence. The police obtained a warrant for David's arrest, allowing them to collect all the necessary documents for DNA analysis and comparison with the evidence. On May 31, 2000, laboratory tests confirmed that the blood on David's jeans belonged to both Laura and him. It was likely that he had been wearing the jeans during the crime, as both Laura's and his blood were found on the fabric. The police had suspected David from the beginning of the investigation, and it took months of additional testing to confirm their theories. Unfortunately, it took 17 years to officially prove his guilt. In November 2001, David attended another interview where he contradicted his previous statements. He claimed that he had never had a serious relationship with Laura, describing their interactions as light flirting. He asserted that he had never affected her emotionally or physically, was not jealous, and did not control her actions. This was in direct contradiction to the accounts of many witnesses who disagreed with him. His only admission was that the jeans found on Laura's body were likely his, but he claimed that he had accidentally left them there. These inconsistencies in his testimony provided enough evidence to charge him. By the time the interview ended, David realized he was in trouble and asked for a lawyer. He was arrested on the night of November 14, 2001, and charged with first-degree murder. After the murder, procedural issues arose because David was under 18 at the time of the crime. His case, which involved an adult, was transferred to juvenile court. In 2002, preliminary hearings were held to decide whether the case should be transferred to adult district court. On February 1, 2002, it was finally decided that he would be tried as an adult. During the next preliminary hearing, challenges arose regarding the selection of witnesses for both the prosecution and the defense. The prosecutor's office wanted several of Laura's friends, as well as her mother, to testify before the grand jury. After lengthy discussions, the witness list was finalized. The trial began 22 years after Laura Salmon's death. On August 26, 2006, David Kyle Gilley had been in prison for 5 years awaiting trial. Multiple witnesses testified, revealing the extent of the cruelty he had shown toward Laura throughout their relationship. Disturbing incidents were recounted. Several witnesses reported hearing David make threats out of jealousy. He assaulted Laura, causing her injuries, including a broken nose, and even threatened the dormitory manager at her college. On one occasion, after a heated argument, he nearly threw Laura down a flight of stairs, but the presence of witnesses may have prevented him from causing serious injury. In high school, classmates witnessed David's abusive behavior toward Laura. He assaulted her by slamming her head into a metal cabinet, pushing her against a wall, and slapping her. When Laura expressed a desire to break up, David locked her in a cabinet and banged on the door from the outside. Others heard him threaten to kill her if they broke up. One evening, while playing near the quarry where Laura was later found, friends saw David break her nose by slamming her face into the hood of a car. One of Laura's friends reported the abuse to the police, but there was no record of any law enforcement action taken. Laura felt her complaint was ignored, even when she went to the police station with a broken nose. Laura wanted to end her relationship with David, but he sent her letters threatening to kill her if she tried. He was extremely possessive, believing that if she was not his, she did not deserve to live. Laura's mother did not know the full extent of David's cruelty, but tried to persuade her daughter to break up with him, feeling that their relationship was unhealthy. She suspected that jealousy may have been the motive behind the eventual murder. Laura was a year older than David, and he became increasingly jealous as she started college and moved to a school where she made new friends and socialized with other boys. The prosecutor's office reported that David was with Laura on the day of the attack, while she was on her way to her grandmother's house to swim. The attacker intended to lure her to a remote area to punish her for seeing another boy. There, they got into a fight, during which David wrestled her to the ground and pinned her down, using his body to restrain her. He then began hitting her on the head with whatever object he could find, which unfortunately included several large stones, causing the young girl to suffer serious injuries and die. In response, the defense argued that the genes found on Laura contained DNA from David, Laura, and an unidentified person, suggesting that David may have been framed. The attorney emphasized that David had criticized the police for bias during the investigation. David's brother testified on his behalf, providing a strong alibi. During cross-examination, police discovered that David's brother had been in contact with David while he was in prison. The brothers discussed ways to get David released, leading to the creation of an elaborate alibi that was exposed at the hearing. David Kyle Gilley was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. He is currently incarcerated, and his defense attorneys have filed multiple appeals against the verdict, all of which have been rejected. Initially, the murder of Laura Salmon did not attract significant public attention. 4 months after the horrific incident, the tragedy was widely reported in the media. The case sparked a national discussion about domestic violence. Since 1984, various measures have been taken to strengthen protections for women facing violence in their relationships. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Bianca Edmonds. Bianca Edmonds was the second of 4 children, with 2 brothers and 1 sister. When Bianca was young, her father took a job with a mining company, which kept him away from home for long periods. This created tension in the family, as her mother wanted him to spend more time with them, but he could not quit his job. This eventually led to their separation. Bianca's mother later remarried another man, who adopted Bianca and her siblings. As a result, Bianca was often referred to by her stepfather's surname, Edmonds. This did not bother the family or Edmonds much, as she had little contact with her biological father in her early years. However, as she grew older and finished school, she reconnected with her biological father, and they developed a close relationship. After completing her secondary education, Bianca joined the Australian Navy. Unfortunately, a year later, she injured her back during training, which led to her being discharged for health reasons. After recovering, she worked various jobs in the retail industry but found it difficult to hold down a permanent position. In 2007, she gave birth to her first son after starting a relationship with a man. However, the man was not interested in family life, and they eventually broke up. By this time, Bianca had matured and knew what she wanted in life. She longed for reliable support and a comfortable lifestyle. In early 2012, shortly after turning 26, she met Michael Capo Siena, who was 35. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and they got married that same year. At the end of 2012, Bianca became pregnant again, and on June 3, 2013, she gave birth to a son. Although their relationship progressed quickly, it was toxic from the start. Michael often complained that Bianca was too controlling. The couple argued frequently, and shortly after the birth of their son, they decided to divorce. In early 2015, Bianca met Glenn Cassidy, a 48-year-old man, through a dating app. As usual, Bianca acted quickly. She appreciated Glenn's gentle nature, which suited her desire to be proactive in the relationship. Their initial online flirtation quickly turned into a real-life meeting and intimacy. Although Glenn was 20 years older than Bianca and was married with 2 children from a previous marriage, their similar life experiences seemed to help them connect quickly. In February 2016, they got married. Meanwhile, Bianca faced a number of personal challenges, most notably a custody battle with her ex-husband, Michael. Bianca's second husband, Michael, was initially not very involved in their son's life and often refused to see him. However, things changed when Michael entered a new relationship, achieved financial stability, and decided to spend more time with his son, who was then 9 months old. In March 2014, Michael requested visitation rights for his son. This led to a number of disputes, with Bianca accusing her ex-husband of being toxic and unfit to be a father. Michael decided to file a lawsuit against Bianca. By August 2015, after several court hearings, he was granted visitation rights, but with strict restrictions. He could only see his son in a neutral location under supervision, with 2-hour visits in Melbourne, a 2-hour drive from where Michael lived. This arrangement caused significant inconvenience for Bianca. She was unhappy that Michael was still interfering in their son's life, and she wanted to sever the relationship but could not find a way to do so. Unfortunately, the situation did not improve. Michael decided to take legal action again, seeking to increase the time and frequency of his visitation with his son and to remove the supervision requirement. This frustrated Bianca even more, leading to numerous arguments that sometimes escalated into physical confrontations. Michael's girlfriend described Bianca as a toxic person who tried to limit Michael's communication with his son out of anger. She said that Michael had changed his mind and wanted to reconnect with the child, and that he was legally entitled to do so. Michael's girlfriend portrayed him as a devoted family man with a kind personality. On the other hand, Glenn, who was in a relationship with Bianca, viewed Michael as a toxic and cruel person who could pose a threat to his son. Bianca frequently expressed her concerns about Michael to Glenn, claiming that he had threatened to kidnap her son. Bianca also attempted to manipulate her son psychologically by telling him that Michael, his biological father, was a bad person, but this tactic did not have the desired effect. Instead, she began to manipulate Glenn, using him as her main tool. Tensions in the family escalated, largely due to Bianca's provocations. She refused to be intimate with her husband unless he agreed to the idea of her ex-husband Michael's death. Over time, their relationship deteriorated. Bianca began to pressure and belittle Glenn, calling him a coward for not dealing with Michael and for not helping her. Initially, Glenn took her words as a joke, but over time, he began to seriously consider killing Michael due to the constant pressure he faced when his wife suggested planning the action. Glenn had written a fairly basic list of important points by hand. He wanted to shoot his enemy and then find a way to dispose of the body. In addition, Glenn's notes were full of spelling errors, highlighting his difficulties with writing. Bianca had received support from her husband, and she prepared him to commit the crime. Glenn desperately wanted to have a child with her, and her manipulation regarding intimacy worked. The couple, who had difficulty conceiving, shared their struggles with their friends. Bianca cleverly convinced Glenn that after Michael died, he would definitely have an heir. After this plan was documented, they began to prepare and execute it step by step. They searched for the best location for an ambush and created a map of the area where Michael lived with his new girlfriend. Bianca's knowledge of the layout of Michael's house helped her create a detailed plan, including the locations of doors and windows. They were very thorough in their preparations. They even mapped out the locations of streetlights and nearby houses with barking dogs. Bianca was eager to proceed and urged that Michael be killed as soon as possible. However, each time they set a date, things went wrong, causing delays. Glenn visited Michael's house several times to assess the entrances and exits of various streets. During these visits, he would call Bianca to discuss any problems that were interfering with their plans. He often expressed frustration that Michael was not home at the scheduled time, as he seemed to be working late or socializing with friends. The attackers communicated in code and referred to the area around Michael's house as the workplace. Glenn often stayed late, waiting for the target of the attack. Despite Bianca's encouragement, Glenn remained anxious and uncertain. Bianca employed her main tactic, intimacy, assuring him that once Michael was dead, he would have everything he wanted. Later, for reasons unknown, the police obtained a recording of their conversation. In response, Glenn installed a call recording app on his cell phone, possibly suspecting that he was being manipulated and wanting to protect himself in case things went wrong. Regardless, this did not absolve him of guilt for the shooting that followed. While carrying out this heinous plan, Bianca was supposed to be on vacation with Glenn's mother. The destination was on the other side of Australia, likely chosen to provide Bianca with an alibi that would convince the police of her innocence. On March 11, 2016, she prepared for the trip and spoke to Glenn about their plans. The next day, March 12, Glenn drove 170 kilometers to Michael's house. At 12:23 p.m., he sent another text message, expressing his love for her and speaking angrily about Michael. Around 1 p.m. that same day, Glenn drove to the road leading to Michael's house. He reiterated his love for Bianca and his willingness to carry out his plan. During this time, Glenn set up an ambush, positioning himself to see the front door of the house. When Michael and Silvana Silva, his girlfriend, arrived home, they settled in to watch a movie. At 7:18 p.m., Silvana looked out the window and saw a man get out of his car and walk toward their house empty-handed. Recognizing him, she told Michael, feeling confused. This was odd since they lived far from Bianca and her new husband, leaving them puzzled as to how he had gotten there. Glenn noticed some people walking by, then returned to his car, presumably to assess the area and collect his thoughts. At 7:27 p.m., he got out of his car again, this time carrying a large white bag. After checking around and confirming that no one was nearby, He approached Michael's front door at 7:30 p.m. Glenn knocked on the door, and his sudden appearance at such a late hour made Michael nervous. He went into the kitchen and grabbed a large knife for protection. Silvana opened the door slightly and kept it on the chain. A brief conversation ensued, in which Michael told Glenn that he could not help Glenn. Glenn then held out his hand as if to say goodbye, and Michael, thinking it was safe, shook his hand. This turned out to be a grave mistake. Glenn grabbed Michael's hand, forcing him into the house. A struggle broke out as Glenn attempted to pull out a handgun and aim it at Michael's head. Michael fought back violently with the knife, striking Glenn several times. Tragically, a shot rang out, killing Michael instantly. Glenn then pointed the gun at Silvana, apparently intending to eliminate her as a witness. However, he had only loaded one bullet into the gun, and when he pulled the trigger, the handgun clicked but did not fire. In a fit of rage, he struck Silvana with his gun, knocking her unconscious. Glenn may have intended to kill her, but after the first blow, he collapsed to the floor, bleeding heavily from a stab wound. By 9:32 p.m., the situation was over. Silvana regained consciousness and found both men dead. She called emergency services, reporting that she had been attacked and that her fiancé had died. She had only suffered a minor concussion from the blow to her head and was weakened by blood loss. When the police arrived, they found a chaotic scene. Silvana gave a detailed account of the events, but as the sole survivor, she became the prime suspect. The police quickly determined that Silvana had nothing to do with the murder. They located Glenn's car parked on the street across from the house. Inside, they found his untouched lunch of fried chicken and green beans. A database check confirmed that the car belonged to Glenn. Police reviewed surveillance camera footage and accessed Glenn's mobile phone. The case was complicated from the start, taking 3 months for police to identify Bianca as the mastermind behind the attack. She apparently believed she would escape, so she was shocked when the police arrived at her home. Bianca Edmonds was arrested in December 2016 and taken to the police station for questioning, where she became hysterical. She acted as if Glenn was making things up and tried to convince him that he had not made a terrible mistake. However, he ignored her warnings and went ahead with his plan while she was away. Bianca claimed that her boyfriend was furious with Michael's behavior and that he was going to take their son away. According to Bianca, Glenn wanted to spend more time with the child. Although Glenn was not the boy's biological father, he had long wanted a child. The police knew this was a lie. Evidence from Glenn's phone confirmed their suspicions. The phone contained saved text messages and recorded calls detailing the planned crime. The police uncovered a wealth of information about the murder plot that had been in the works for months. In her defense, Bianca presented the last text message Glenn had sent her, in which he expressed his love for her and his hatred for Michael. She claimed that this text message made her aware of the impending attack, which she felt powerless to prevent. However, the police quickly noticed a major problem with the notes Glenn had written about the murder plan. They were full of spelling errors. In contrast, the text message Bianca received was perfectly written too perfectly, and it resembled her own writing style. This led the police to suspect that she had sent the text messages from Glenn's phone to create a false narrative. Bianca denied any involvement in the crime and claimed she knew nothing about it. Despite the strong case against Bianca, the police did not have enough evidence to charge her at the time. She dismissed the charges and denied any involvement in the murder. As a result, she was released, and the investigation continued. During this time, Bianca became bored and returned to Tinder in search of new dates. Just 3 weeks after Glenn's death, she met a man who had just been released from prison on parole. He had a history of violent crime, including the murder of his first wife by slitting her throat in front of their 6-year-old son. Early in their relationship, Bianca informed him that her third husband, Glenn, had died of cancer just weeks after they were to marry. Bianca was pregnant but unfortunately lost the baby in an accident. Her new boyfriend later discovered Glenn and Michael online. He confronted her about the incident, and she revealed that she had planned the murder but insisted that Glenn should not die. She explained that she was too scared to share this with him when they first met, worried that he would not want to continue their relationship. Bianca also admitted to sending text messages from her husband's phone to mislead the investigation. She expressed deep regret for Glenn's death, explaining that she only intended to get rid of Michael. Her motive was fear that he might gain custody of their son. Following Bianca's confession, she became panicked and expressed fear of being caught by the police. Her boyfriend reported her statements to the police. In April 2018, Bianca was questioned again. Despite her boyfriend's testimony, she continued to deny sending the text messages, claiming that she had never seen any maps of Michael's house and denying any involvement in any plans to kill her ex-husband. The police informed her that her fingerprints had been found on the handgun used in the shooting. She was initially unable to respond to this information but continued to deny that custody issues were a motive for the crime. When the police recounted her boyfriend's account, she admitted that she could not remember the conversation. During this time, Bianca suffered from depression after the loss of her child, which she attributed to her mental health and the effects of her antidepressants. Unfortunately, the police determined that they did not have enough evidence to arrest her and were forced to release her. This situation continued until June 2019. Meanwhile, the police had gathered enough evidence to prove that she had either incited or directly participated in the murder of her ex-husband, Michael. The case was delayed, and it was not until June 2022 that hearings began regarding her involvement in Michael's murder. The prosecutor's office believes that Bianca's main motive was her desire to avoid sharing custody of her child and her fear that the father might take the child away. The police discovered that Bianca had planned to imprison her third husband, Glenn, to remove him from her life, as she found him too old and was bored with him. However, the attack did not go as planned, resulting in the deaths of both Michael and Glenn. The prosecution argued that Bianca had written a text message pretending to be Glenn to create an alibi. They also revealed that the outing with Glenn's mother was part of the plan for the crime. To convince the jury, they thoroughly analyzed all the recordings of conversations and text messages. All available evidence was presented, including a map that Bianca was said to have drawn. Bianca's DNA and fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, which clearly indicated that she had lied. Her attorney claimed that this was only circumstantial evidence. It was believed that Glenn disliked Michael because of his relationship with her son. However, several witnesses testified for the prosecution, claiming that Bianca had long wanted to get rid of Michael, her ex-husband, due to a custody dispute. Even Bianca's mother testified in court that the day after the murder, her daughter called to confess that Glenn should not have died and that it was her fault. Bianca claimed that the fingerprints found on the murder weapon were the result of an intimate encounter between her and Glenn. She stated that he was aroused when she pointed the gun at him, but this explanation seemed implausible and did not account for her dishonesty during the interrogations. A few weeks after she began contacting her new boyfriend, Bianca discovered that she was pregnant again. He offered to recant his statement to the police if she forgave him and returned to him, but Bianca believed that the real father of the child was someone else. The jury deliberated on the complicated case but could not reach a unanimous verdict, leading to the cancellation of the original hearings. A retrial began in August, but it was also found to be flawed due to arguments that violated court rules. In December 2022, the case returned to court, this time with all the evidence gathered during the investigation presented. The prosecution presented strong evidence, including text messages exchanged between Bianca and Glenn. In these messages, Bianca mentioned celebrating a special day, although she had no legitimate reason for the occasion. This implied a connection to the murder. Ultimately, the jury concluded that Bianca was the cunning mastermind behind this terrible crime. 2 lives were lost, one of which was cruelly deceived. People were horrified by the level of manipulation Glenn faced before his death. Bianca recognized his weakness and exploited it to her own advantage, trying to achieve multiple goals at once. However, Glenn's death was not part of her plan. She mistakenly believed she could convince her husband to admit his guilt and escape the consequences. Bianca Edmonds was sentenced to 26 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Her children were placed in foster care with relatives, leaving them without parental care. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Stott family. In June 2013, the staff at a medical center in Springfield, Missouri, faced a challenging situation when they admitted 24-year-old Sarah Stott. She was in critical condition, losing consciousness and crying out in pain when she regained awareness. Doctors discovered she had a brain hemorrhage and kidney failure, causing her organs to function erratically. They struggled to understand her rapidly deteriorating state. The fight for Sarah's life lasted several days until they received an anonymous tip. The caller revealed that the Stott family had been plagued by mysterious illnesses for a year, which had already claimed the lives of Sarah's father, Mark, and her brother, Sean. Both had died without receiving medical care, and now it seems Sarah was next. Fortunately, she was admitted to the medical center, giving her a chance at survival. The police began investigating the unusual illnesses affecting the Stott family, suspecting it was not just a coincidence. The family comprised 6 members: Mark, Diane, and their children Sean and 3 daughters Sarah, Rachel, and the 9-year-old girl. Mark Stott, born in St. Louis in 1951, he met Diane while studying in Texas. Despite their differences, they quickly found common interests and began dating. Mark was optimistic and artistic, performing in a band, while Diane was more reserved and introverted. Their relationship progressed rapidly, leading to an unplanned pregnancy, after which they decided to marry. Following the birth of Sean, Diane pursued her education, graduated from nursing school, and began working in a hospital's cardiology department. In contrast, Mark became a stay-at-home dad, managing household responsibilities and caring for the children. It appeared that Diane prioritized her career, striving to provide for the family. To seek better job opportunities, they relocated to Springfield, Missouri, a tranquil town ideal for raising children. This town was also Diane's hometown, conservative and religious, making her feel safe and secure. In the years that followed, they welcomed 3 daughters. To outsiders, they appeared to be the ideal family, but behind the appearance, they faced significant challenges. Sean, their son, struggled with health issues from a young age and was diagnosed with autism during his school years, which required special support. Despite the father's efforts, the daughters also experienced learning difficulties in school, particularly Sarah. The family's biggest challenge was financial. They simply did not have enough money to support their growing household. One income was insufficient to meet their needs, and they needed to find a new home because their current one lacked space. Mark occasionally helped the family's finances by taking on odd jobs, such as bartending. However, he primarily focused on caring for the children. In his free time, he pursued his passion for music, writing songs and playing various instruments. He eventually began performing with a musical group, which generated some income, but it was still not enough for their large family. Despite their struggles, they seemed prepared to face their challenges together, until April 8, 2012, the day after Mark's birthday. In the family home lay the lifeless body of Mark. His wife reported that he had died from a mysterious illness resembling the flu, which progressed rapidly. She stayed by his side to comfort him, but despite her efforts, Mark's condition worsened significantly. His body even appeared unusual, with his skin taking on a yellowish tint. Diane mentioned that on the day Mark died, he experienced a seizure, something he had never had before. She attributed this to his age. When the seizure occurred, she wanted to take Mark to the hospital, but he insisted that he wanted to stay home and rest. Despite his wishes, she began preparing to leave. By the time she was ready, she found him unresponsive. 45 minutes after the seizure, she called emergency services. Upon a quick examination, nothing seemed suspicious, and the death certificate attributed his passing to natural causes related to his age. During this time, their son Sean was very concerned about his father's health. He documented all of Mark's symptoms on social media and questioned the natural causes of his death. Diane requested that her husband be cremated, and his ashes were scattered over a local lake near the church. Mark's death shocked everyone. He was a strong, healthy, making his sudden passing all the more puzzling. 5 months later, on September 2012, the police were called to another home for similar reasons. This larger house was more suitable for the family. Diane lived there with her children after selling their previous home and receiving an insurance payout following her husband's death. On that day, Diane found her 26-year-old son, Sean, dead in his room. His death mirrored the flu that had claimed his father's life. After her husband's passing, Diane became more proactive and took Sean to the doctor when he started showing symptoms. However, the doctors found nothing alarming, only a water imbalance. Despite Sean's worsening condition, Diane stopped taking him to the doctor, claiming he refused medical help and felt uncomfortable, which she attributed to his autism. The night before he died, Sean seemed to improve, leading Diane to believe that his mysterious illness was fading. She went to church with her daughters to pray for him. When they returned, they found Sean unresponsive, having apparently tried to get out of bed and fallen, leaving a pool of blood on the floor. His sudden death shocked everyone. Sean worked at a center for people with disabilities and was known for his positive and friendly nature. Like his father, Sean was cremated, and his ashes were scattered over a lake. About 9 months later, in June 2013, Sarah, the eldest daughter of the family, was hospitalized with symptoms similar to those that had caused the deaths of her brother and father. The police arrived at the hospital 2 days after Sarah was admitted in critical condition. While doctors were doing everything they could to save her, they could not provide the police with any specific information. They were still trying to identify the cause of her unusual illness, which resembled the flu, but it was concerning that both her kidneys and brain had failed. The medical staff conducted several tests, and there was an unspoken fear that Sarah might have been poisoned. The police were contacted by an anonymous caller from the church that the Stott family attended, where Diane had played the organ for many years. The pastor suspected that these events were not mere coincidences and feared that there was a murderer at work, so he decided to call the police. He shared his concerns that Mark's death and Sarah's worsening condition might be connected. The pastor found Mark's death particularly suspicious, noting that he had been healthy right before he died under similar circumstances. He was beginning to suspect Diane's involvement in these tragic incidents. During this time, Diane claimed that her daughter was simply ill while she acted like a grieving widow, a mother mourning loved ones who were dying under mysterious circumstances. This behavior helped her gain significant support from the religious community. However, the pastor suspected that Diane was deliberately maintaining this facade to avoid uncomfortable questions. When Diane last visited her daughter in the hospital, her behavior changed dramatically. The nurses noted that she was in a good mood. She joked and talked more about an upcoming trip to Florida than about her daughter's serious health issues, despite the doctor's alarming prognosis. They were uncertain if the girl would survive this mysterious illness. The mother's apparent indifference only heightened the authorities' suspicions against her. Diane was invited to voluntarily come to the police station for a discussion. On June 20, 2013, she arrived at the police department. By then, Sarah's condition had stabilized somewhat, but none of the medical tests revealed any toxins in her body. It appeared that any harmful substances had been completely processed and left no trace. The detectives knew they had to be very careful when speaking with a potential poisoner. Meanwhile, they couldn't perform many tests on Sarah due to her worsening condition. They continued to hope that Sarah would recover and provide information for the investigation. The detectives aimed to understand the events leading up to the victims' illnesses and gather clues about the causes of their deteriorating health. The situation was similar to what had happened with Sean. On that tragic day, Diane had gone to church with her other daughters, and upon returning home, she noticed that her eldest daughter, Sarah, was very ill. Prior to this, Sarah had been experiencing mild symptoms similar to those of her brother and father, so Diane did not panic initially. Diane believed they would be able to help Sarah when she returned home, and she eventually sent Sarah to the hospital. The first thing Diane questioned was whether her daughter had attempted to end her own life. Sarah had bipolar disorder, which meant she might have harmed herself. Diane reviewed all the medications available to her daughter and insisted that Sarah had tried to end her life multiple times in the past. It seemed as if Diane was desperately trying to persuade the police to believe her perspective. The officers did not inform Diane that they were also investigating the deaths of Mark and Sean, as they wanted to avoid alarming a potential suspect. During this time, Diane acted unusually. When responding to questions, she mentioned that Sarah had been a difficult child, was struggling to find work, and was not doing well in school, all while tuition bills were piling up. This seemed like an attempt to justify her actions, which felt out of place given that her daughter was fighting for her life in the hospital. Additionally, Diane expressed resentment toward her husband, who rarely worked and spent his free time on leisure activities. The detectives simply listened as she continued to share her thoughts and feelings. Diane acknowledged that she had always viewed Sarah as a problem because of her bipolar disorder. Despite this, Sarah continued to live with the family and had no intention of moving out. Diane revealed that for a long time, she even wished that Sarah would end her own life. Diane insisted multiple times that she did not harm her loved ones. Eventually, she made an unexpected confession to the detectives. She stated that her husband and children had been drinking antifreeze. This revelation was significant because antifreeze poisoning is very dangerous, and its symptoms can mimic those of various other chemicals, making it hard to identify. It leads to a slow and painful death. Diane confessed that she had even drunk antifreeze herself, having seen her family engage in it for some unknown reason. Of course, the detectives did not believe these absurd stories. Suspicions quickly started to be confirmed when they checked her browser search history. It turned out that well before Mark's death, she had begun searching for information on the signs and methods of poisoning, including antifreeze. She was clearly selecting the most effective and discreet means for murder, considering various medications, minerals, and essential oils that have a suppressive impact on the body. Several search queries were very provocative, for example, how to kill your husband, or how people with bipolar disorder commit and end one's own life. This indicated premeditated murder long before Mark died. When asked about all this during a follow-up meeting, Diane denied any guilt. She admitted that her husband's death did not happen as originally claimed. When the seizure occurred, she was sure that Mark would not be saved. According to Diane, she did this because she hated her husband. Everyone described the man as very good-natured. Probably, hatred stemmed from the couple's approach to the family budget. Diane simply could no longer handle the burdens at work, but she could never wait for her husband's help. She felt the same kind of hatred toward her son Sean. She could not bear to look at him. Sean was just seeking understanding and warmth from his mother, but instead, she just threw him out of the room. Every time Sean came in, he sensed that something was off, especially when he investigated his father's illness. When Mark died, she realized that she could no longer tolerate her ailing son, so she began to treat him badly every day. Diane claimed that it took only a couple of days for his body to succumb, but that was a lie. The boy was agonizingly dying for more than a week before he finally left this world. Now her attention and dissatisfaction focused on her eldest daughter, whom Diane considered the main problem in the family. Sarah was spending too much money on her education, but it was doomed to fail due to her lack of talent. Sarah dreamed of becoming a French translator, took out a student loan, and soon after graduating from college, she had to start repaying it, but there were no job prospects for Sarah, and her mother refused to pay her debts. Diane hated Sarah for not being able to find the job and solve her financial problems. For days before Sarah ended up in the hospital, her mother started adding antifreeze to her food. In the police station, Diane confessed that she sent her daughter to the hospital so quickly because she could no longer bear what was happening in her suffering. Naturally, Diane felt no pity. In reality, she had been preparing drinks in advance that were almost half antifreeze. Diane had stashed bottles of cola that could kill up to 30 people at once, according to experts. All of this was stored in the refrigerator to methodically poison her family, which seemed very alarming, especially considering that there were 2 other daughters in the house. However, Diane was not afraid that her younger daughter would accidentally take this drink, as she plans included the girl murder right after Sarah's. But to convict Diane, tangible evidence was needed. Despite the cremation of her husband and son, some fragments of Mark and Sean could still be found. After conducting autopsies, detectives suggested examining them to see if the deadly substance left traces in their bodies. Tests showed the presence of ethylene glycol, one of the main components of antifreeze. Before arresting the poisoner, the police decided to find out if she had an accomplice, as it would be difficult to carry out everything alone. It is hard to imagine how the suspect managed to keep all her close ones unaware of her intentions. The detectives arrested Diane without informing her and then questioned her second daughter, Rachel. They told Rachel that her mother had confessed to poisoning Sarah, which made Rachel extremely anxious. It was evident that she knew more than she was admitting. The detectives wanted to speak with Rachel to gain more insight into the family's situation. Even before Diane confessed, Rachel had been acting oddly, laughing and joking inappropriately about the deaths of family members, but she didn't confess to anything. As suspicions grew, the police repeatedly searched the Stott family home and discovered a diary belonging to Rachel, which proved to be highly informative. In one concerning entry, Rachel reflected that soon both her father and brother would die. She comforted herself with the thought of getting money and her father's car. Alarmingly, this entry was dated 6 months before Mark's death, indicating that Rachel was aware of her mother's troubling intentions and did not try to stop her or warn anyone. It appeared she was content with the idea of her entire family dying soon. When Rachel was shown the diary, she was clearly taken aback. She quickly broke down and admitted that she had been working with her mother, Diane, who was the poisoner, from the very start. Their collaboration began when Rachel assisted Diane in researching methods and poisons online. They discovered that antifreeze, which is sold in stores with a bitter additive to deter accidental consumption, could be purchased online for their malicious plan. Diane would prepare poisoned meals and drinks, which Rachel would then deliver to her father, brother, and even sister. In her confession, Rachel stated that they poisoned each family member up to 3 times a day. Rachel had the closest relationship with her mother and had always been the favored daughter. Just like Diane, who resented the others and viewed them as burdens. Together, they decided to eliminate the rest of the family and start a new life. A month after Mark's death, Rachel shocked her family's friends by posting on social media, "I think I haven't seen my mother so relaxed in a long time." This suggested that they were content with the outcome. Rachel shared that they had discussed each murder in detail and agreed that Mark needed to die. However, she was uncertain about Sean. She believed he didn't have to be killed and could instead be placed in a specialized treatment facility permanently. Rachel even argued with her mother about Sean, initially opposing the idea of his death but eventually conceding that it would be better to eliminate him. It seemed like a collaboration between mother and daughter in their plans. Rachel mentioned that she was surprised by Sarah's poisoning. She thought the reasons were not financial or related to deaths, but rather stemmed from a simple argument. Sarah often clashed with their mother, who found her very annoying. Regarding the 9-year-old girl, Rachel made vague remarks implying that the girl was also seen as a burden, which contributed to the desire to eliminate her as well. Diane was informed of Rachel's confession and encouraged to tell the complete truth. She agreed to do so. According to Diane, her resentment towards her husband began because he was emotionally distant and did not engage with her. She was also frustrated by his lavish spending and inability to support the family financially. Diane accused him of both physical and verbal abuse, as well as domestic violence, but these allegations were not corroborated by anyone who knew him well. In an attempt to defend herself, she claimed he had been unfaithful. However, none of Mark's close friends, whom he saw almost daily, supported these claims. Even Rachel's diary noted that their father was a devoted family man, suggesting he would harm himself before harming anyone else. Although Rachel and Diane expressed ongoing feelings of grievance, detectives believed the motive for the murders was more straightforward. Specifically, life insurance policies had been taken out on each family member, with benefits paid upon Mark's death. This would allow the widow to buy a larger, more comfortable home, marking the start of their deceptive plan. Rachel had also arranged other insurance policies that she intended to collect. Her diary revealed her concerns about the situation, which was closely examined during the hearings. Ultimately, Diane confessed that they had decided to take Sarah to the hospital while not doing the same for the other two victims because Rachel simply wanted to prevent anyone else from dying in the new house. They weren't worried about Sarah's passing. Instead, they viewed a dying loved one as a burden, just like the others. Rachel explained her behavior by sharing her deep anxieties related to her deceased brother. She vividly recalled the traumatic image of him lying on the floor, blood at his mouth, with cold, pale hands and glassy eyes. Following this, she moved into his room and often wrote in her diary about her heightened anxiety and the nightmares she experienced, in which Sean appeared. Both Rachel and Diane were arrested and charged with first-degree murder, and they were denied bail. The Lutheran Redeemer Church attended by the Stott family issued a supportive statement on behalf of all parishioners during this challenging time. Interestingly, although the pastor had reported his suspicions to the police and initiated the letter of support, he continued to pray for their souls. Rachel accepted responsibility for her actions and agreed to testify against her mother, admitting to 2 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of attempted second-degree murder. She received 2 life sentences but could apply for parole after 42 years. During her sentencing, Rachel apologized to her sister Sarah, who survived the poisoning and underwent extensive rehabilitation to learn to walk and talk again. Later, Rachel requested a reduction in her sentence, seeking a retrial. She claimed she was intimidated by her male attorney and had not been given a psychiatric evaluation, highlighting her mental health issues. However, her appeal was denied in 2018, and she did not pursue any further efforts to lessen her sentence. Diane Stott was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Throughout the trial, she used vague language and did not fully admit her guilt. She received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In one of her final interviews, Diane claimed she was not responsible for Mark's death, attributing it to his addiction to alcohol and banned substance. She stated that he had connections with dangerous people, which led to his suffering. At that time, she had such strong feelings of hatred toward her husband that she did not want to help him. When Mark died, she felt relieved. However, there was no evidence to support Diane's claims about Mark's dependency. Her new narrative contradicted diary entries and statements from Rachel, leading others to doubt her. Sarah's life changed forever due to severe poisoning, and she will never fully recover. She now resides in a special care center and has a guardian. Sarah dreams of her late father and brother, believing they are like guardian angels watching over her. She has forgiven her mother and sister and does not hold any resentment toward them. Her strong faith keeps her devoted, and she spends a lot of time in church. Sarah hopes to achieve her dreams of becoming a French translator and visiting Paris. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom. Christopher Newsom was born on September 21, 1983, in Knoxville, Tennessee, to Hugh and Mary Newsom. He was often called Chris by his friends and family. He attended Halls High School. There, he joined the baseball team, where he showcased impressive skills and teamwork. In 2002, he enrolled in Pellissippi State Technical Community College, a community college, to study carpentry. During this time, he met Shannon Christian, a beautiful girl who captivated him at first sight. Shannon was born on April 29, 1985, in Nacogdoches, Texas. Shannon, known for her beauty and kind nature, they developed a close relationship with each other. In 1997, the Christian family moved to Tennessee. Shannon graduated from Farragut High School in 2003 and then enrolled in the sociology program at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. During this time, she actively supported Christopher by attending his baseball games and traveling with him. They were often described as inseparable. Although they still lived with their parents, they dreamed of a future together. In the city of Knoxville, there lived a man named Lamarcus Davidson, who was originally from Memphis and was born on June 13, 1981. His childhood and teenage years were challenging. His mother struggled with severe substance addiction, and his father was an alcoholic. Lamarcus had a half-brother named Latalvis Cobbins. At the age of 16, Lamarcus had a chance to change his life but chose to pursue a criminal path, which quickly led him to prison. After prison, instead of turning his life around, Lamarcus began dealing illegal substances and became involved with a girl who was also entrenched in the banned substance. Unfortunately, Latalvis faced a similar fate. In 2003, Latalvis was convicted of attempted robbery in the third degree and served time. He was released on August 5, 2006, and moved to Knoxville, where he rented a room in a run-down house in the industrial area of the city. Lamarcus also tried to locate Latalvis, who was dating Vanessa Coleman. Lamarcus set off on a journey with his girlfriend. They arrived in Knoxville in early 2007. On January 5, Lamarcus and his girlfriend had a serious argument, which escalated to him hitting her. The next day, she chose to leave. On Saturday, January 6, 2007, Shannon and Christopher had plans for dinner and a party. Before meeting up, Shannon stopped by her friend's house to help her with makeup, hair, and outfit selection. They parted ways around 8 p.m., and Shannon began waiting for Christopher, who was coming from another part of town. At the same time, Lamarcus, along with his two friends George Thomas and Eric Boyd, formed a dangerous trio that arrived at Latalvis's place with a sinister plan. During their drive, they used banned substances and talked. Around midnight, Christopher and Shannon went to the parking lot of the apartment complex. Shannon got behind the wheel of her Toyota pickup, while Christopher leaned over next to her, keeping the door open. They shared a kiss. Suddenly, armed bandits appeared and attacked them. The criminals forced the frightened couple into the back seat of the truck and drove them to a rented house. Both Shannon and Christopher had their hands tied behind their backs. Later, it was revealed that Eric had distanced himself from the gang at that time. The next morning, January 7th, Shannon's mother, Dina Christian, woke up feeling uneasy because Shannon had not returned home and wasn't answering her phone. Dina's worry increased when Shannon's best friend called to say the couple hadn't shown up at the party. So, Dina contacted the rescue service. Realizing that the kidnapping victims were adults and that the authorities were not taking action, the families of them people decided to search for their children on their own. That evening, Lamarcus arrived at Daphne's house, his girlfriend, driving Shannon's car and wearing Christopher's sneakers, which were clearly too small for him. Daphne noticed these details and asked him to take her to the rented house so she could pick up her belongings, including clothes and cosmetics. When Daphne arrived, she saw Latalvis and George Thomas. They informed her that they couldn't get her belongings at that moment. Daphne was not allowed to enter the kitchen or the bedroom where Latalvis was currently holding Shannon. Feeling frustrated, Daphne left. Meanwhile, Shannon and Christopher were enduring a horrific ordeal. After being subjected to various forms of torture, Christopher was taken to the railroad tracks, dressed only in a shirt and underwear. They forced him to walk barefoot, blindfolded, with his hands bound and gagged. Suddenly, loud gunshots rang out, attacking Christopher in the neck and back. He did not die immediately, but the third attack to his head was fatal. Afterward, the attackers poured gasoline on him and set him on fire. Upon returning to the house, they subjected Shannon to abuse, which was incredibly brutal and lasted for several hours. They then bound her, put her in a garbage bag, and covered her with sheets. She was slowly dying from lack of oxygen. On January 8th, the burnt body of a man was discovered near the railroad tracks, and an examination confirmed it was Christopher. The investigators tasked with informing his mother, Mary. They had to caution her that the condition of the body would be horrifying. Nevertheless, she insisted on identifying him at the morgue. Mary placed her hand on the body bag and whispered to her son. The criminals left the rented house, and Lamaricus chose to stay at Daphne's for a few nights. He claimed that his brother had suddenly disappeared with the apartment keys, making it impossible for him to get inside. Although Daphne was skeptical at first, she eventually believed him. Meanwhile, the other accomplices, Latalvis, Vanessa, and George returned to Kentucky. In her personal diary, Vanessa wrote about how exciting her life had become and the new experiences she had gained recently. On January 9th, police officers arrived at a rented house where a tragic incident had occurred. Inside, they found Shannon's lifeless body, which was sent for examination. The doctors concluded that both victims had suffered greatly. A corrosive chemical substance was found in Shannon's throat, on her body, and in the area of her injured genitals, indicating that she had been tortured while alive. Investigators also conducted a thorough examination, and the first thing that caught the investigators' eyes was that the floor was covered in dirt. Furthermore, a pack of cigarettes was found in the living room, even though neither Shannon nor Christopher smoked. Finally, the agent stumbled upon an envelope, and after it was subjected to a fingerprint analysis, it was linked to Lamaricus. He had been involved in numerous crimes and had a criminal record. The detectives had no trouble determining his place of residence. The police department learned about the situation and intended to speak with Lamaricus first. However, he had fled. He made a critical mistake by calling Eric, which agents overheard and recorded. They also located Daphne and convinced her to assist with the investigation. During her first interrogation, a frightened Daphne shared everything she knew and mentioned that Lamaricus had pleaded with her to believe in his innocence. The detectives recorded everything on video, showing the disarray in the apartment. In addition to important shell casings, experts found video recordings, Christopher's shoes, binoculars, and a discharged .22 caliber revolver that matched the weapon used to kill Christopher. The case gained significant attention, reaching beyond the state, prompting the involvement of federal agents. Crucial information emerged about the video found in the apartment. It had been rented from a library in Kentucky by George Thomas. Meanwhile, the police needed a strategy to approach Lamaricus and decided to start with Eric. Finding Eric was straightforward, and within hours, he was located and arrested. His attempts to shift the blame onto others failed due to the strong evidence linking him to the crime. That same day, Vanessa and Latalvis was also arrested. On January 12, 2007, Shannon's family made a public appeal seeking attention from the media while waiting for updates on the investigation. They expressed gratitude for the help they received in searching for the couple and organized prayers for the funeral. Unfortunately, due to the condition of Shannon's body, the family could not hold an open ceremony. All 5 suspects provided their accounts of the events, trying to blame each other, but they agreed that the attack was motivated by robbery. Eric was believed to be the main perpetrator and was also accused of knowing about the crime beforehand and failing to intervene. The other suspects admitted to being in the rented house during the incident. There was uncertainty about whether Vanessa participated in the violence willingly or was coerced. She was placed under protection, but after several interrogations, she eventually admitted that she actively took part in the attack. On January 25, 2007, a memorial service was held at the University of Tennessee campus to honor Shannon. A year later, a golf tournament was organized, and a victims' memorial fund was created. Additionally, scholarships were established for senior high school students from Shannon's alma mater. In memory of Christopher, Pellissippi College held an annual memorial baseball tournament at Halls Community Park. Halls High School has also awarded an annual scholarship in his name to the top baseball player. George, Latalvis, and Vanessa faced charges related to the case. Initially, they were expected to be tried in separate trials from May to August 2008, but Eric was federally charged in the U.S. District Court. On April 16, 2008, Eric Boyd was found guilty on all counts, including theft and concealing a fugitive's whereabouts. He received the maximum sentence of 18 years in prison. George's attorneys requested a speedy trial, arguing that there was no evidence linking him to the crime scene. Their request was granted, and the trial was scheduled for August 2008, but it was postponed to 2009. At that time, District Attorney Randy Mickles announced that if Latalvis and Vanessa were found guilty, the state would seek the death penalty. However, the trials for both Latalvis and Vanessa, as well as George's trial, were delayed due to leaks to the press about the case details. The defense argued that a change of venue was necessary to ensure a fair trial, but this request was denied by Knox County Criminal Court Judge Richard Baumgartner. He convened a new jury in Nashville in November 2008. The house where the victims were killed was purchased by a company and quickly demolished. The new owners planned to build a memorial for Shannon and Christopher on the site. By the end of August the following year, Latalvis was scheduled to stand trial. During his testimony, he admitted to lying several times during his interrogation but stated that he would only tell the truth now that he was under oath. On the first day of deliberation, the jury met for about 10 hours. The following morning, the verdict was announced. Latalvis Cobbins was found guilty of both murders but was acquitted of abuse assault charges. On August 26, 2009, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 2 months later, Lamaricus went to trial. A key piece of evidence against him was the testimony of a medical examiner who conducted the autopsy. Her detailed testimony about the victim's injuries left those in court in disbelief. A particularly shocking moment occurred and autopsy photographs were shown. The prosecutor's assistant fainted, leading to a brief recess during which Judge Richard warned that anyone who cried would be removed from the courtroom. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours and identified many new factors that increased the severity of the charges. These included the various methods used to inflict pain on the victims. Lamaricus Davidson was found guilty of first-degree aggravated robbery and first-degree murder. Additionally, he was convicted for his involvement in abuse assaults against Christopher and for committing violence against Shannon. The sentencing hearing began on October 28, 2009, at 9 a.m. and was expected to continue until Friday. The prosecutors aimed for the death penalty and called upon the victims' relatives to share their testimonies and emotions. Shannon's younger brother spoke about the importance of his sister in his life, while Dina, in a calm and measured tone, shared the devastating impact that losing her daughter had on her. Judge Richard described these crimes as some of the most inhumane cases he had ever encountered and stated that no punishment could be deemed sufficient for the murders committed. Jurors unanimously recommended that Lamaricus Davidson receive the death penalty on 4 counts of capital murder, 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of premeditated first-degree murder against Christopher and Shannon. Dina later stated that she and her family were pleased with the sentence, feeling that justice had been achieved. Hugh, Christopher's father, hoped that other court cases would result in similar outcomes. Meanwhile, the media continued to cover the situation, leading to new theories. Some people suggested that the crimes were racially motivated because both Shannon and Christopher were white, while their attackers were black. This sparked a rally organized by white nationalists, which prompted another group to protest against them. The protesters insisted that there was no link between the crime and the race of the victims, emphasizing that the incident started with the carjacking of Shannon. They also made it clear that they had no association with the rally or its organizers. On December 8, 2009, George Thomas was found guilty of all charges against him. The specific charges included 2 counts of murder with extreme cruelty and 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. His case relied entirely on circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. The sentencing hearing occurred the same day and continued until December 10. The jury deliberated for approximately 3 hours and returned the sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole for each of the 4 capital convictions. Vanessa's situation became a significant legal challenge. Although federal authorities granted her immunity, intending to make her a key witness in a federal auto theft case, state courts did not agree to release her. They ruled that federal immunity did not apply to state charges of murder and abuse assault. On May 13, 2010, Vanessa Coleman was found not guilty of first-degree murder and the crimes against Christopher. However, she was still punished for her involvement in other serious offenses, including kidnapping, abuse assault, and murder related to Shannon's case. On July 30, 2010, she was sentenced to 53 years in prison. 4 years later, just as the victims' families were starting to heal from their trauma, a shocking development raised doubts about the fairness of the trial. In March 2011, Judge Richard, who had presided over the case, revealed that he was stepping down due to banned substance addiction. The state Supreme Court then upheld the decisions made in the cases against George and Vanessa and ordered new hearings. In the second trial, Vanessa's diary became crucial evidence for prosecutors. They aimed to show Vanessa's connection to the crimes that occurred that night, using statements Vanessa had written in her diary during the days leading up to Shannon and Christopher's deaths. This evidence raised significant questions about her claims of innocence. Despite this, Vanessa maintained that she had accidentally ended up in that house and was a victim of circumstances. Her lawyer argued that her diary entries were nonsensical attempts, suggesting that the torture and murder of the victims were irrelevant to her at all. He informed the jury that Lamarcus attacked Vanessa when she tried to leave the house and that he threatened her when she mentioned seeking help. On May 17, 2013, the judge ruled on a sentencing case, stating that it was the most complex and horrific case he had ever encountered. A new trial for George resulted in a guilty verdict, with the jury once again recommending a life sentence but with the possibility of parole. Shortly after, Supreme Court Judge Walter Kurtz upheld the jury's decision, sentencing George Thomas to 2 consecutive life sentences for murder and an additional 25 years for abuse offenses. While Christopher's parents were relieved that justice was served, they remained determined to hold George's accomplices accountable as well. They made every effort to contact him, and after 11 years following the tragic events, he finally disclosed details about his collaborators in various crimes. On March 20, 2018, a Knox County grand jury returned a 36-count indictment against Eric Boyd. He was transferred from a federal correctional institution in Yazoo City, Mississippi, and was held at the Knox County Jail, where he was being held on $1 million bail. Eric finally went to trial on state charges in August 2019. Co-defendant George Thomas testified at the trial of Eric Boyd. In exchange for his testimony, George was allowed to have his first-degree murder convictions reduced to second-degree murder, his aggravated abuse convictions reduced to aggravated assault, and his sentence reduced from life in prison with the possibility of parole to 50 years. Thus, on August 13, 2019, Eric Boyd was found guilty on 36 counts of murder and invasion of privacy, receiving a life sentence plus an additional 90 years in prison. Every year, the families of Shannon and Christopher hold a memorial walk to honor the couple. In 2022, many cyclists participated in the event, riding through the streets of Knoxville. This act became a meaningful show of respect for the grieving families, allowing people to express their remembrance and love for the victims. The organizers of the event announced their intention to continue the bike ride annually to raise public awareness about the tragic events. One can only hope that this tragic case, which took the lives of young people, will serve as an important lesson for someone. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Natalie Henderson. In 2016, Natalie Henderson celebrated her 17th birthday. She lived in Roswell, while her friend Carter Davis, also 17, was from nearby Woodstock. Although they both attended high school, they attended different schools. For 3 years, Natalie was part of the custodial team at her school, motivated by her aspirations of becoming a lifeguard. Friends described Natalie as cheerful, outgoing, engaging, and confident. She was an active young woman who loved to sing and play the guitar, and she spent hundreds of hours volunteering to help animals. Carter Davis volunteered at a local animal shelter and was a member of both the football and lacrosse teams at his school. Coaches often praised his athletic abilities and encouraged him to play in college. With his energetic and cheerful personality, he was known for always smiling and encouraging his teammates, especially when they faced challenges. Both teenagers had promising futures ahead of them, but tragically, their lives came to an abrupt end one day. At around 6 a.m. on Monday, August 1, 2016, a delivery driver arrived at a supermarket to unload his groceries. However, he noticed something unusual. To reach the unloading area, he had to go around two cars parked oddly in the square, which was strange, as there had never been any cars or strangers there before. As he approached, he saw two bodies lying motionless on the pavement, surrounded by blood. Panicked, he immediately called emergency services. When the police arrived, they quickly identified the victims as 17-year-old Natalie Henderson and her friend Carter Davis. Both had been shot in the head, and Natalie was found wearing nothing, raising suspicions that she may have been abused. The crime scene indicated a homicide, with no signs of a struggle or weapons nearby. It appeared that the young victims had been shot unexpectedly. The area was secured, and forensic experts began their investigation. The teens were due to return to school in just over a month. However, instead of focusing on their senior year, their parents had to prepare for their funerals. Both schools that Natalie and Carter attended announced a day of mourning and held a fundraiser to support their families. The news of their deaths shocked everyone who knew them, as well as the residents of this quiet town. Natalie and Carter were active, friendly young people who volunteered and participated in sports. They had no known enemies or critics. On the day the bodies were found, 2 candlelight vigils were held in loving memory of the deceased, with hopes that the police would quickly apprehend the person responsible for such a horrific act. In their grief, the city's residents were in a state of panic. They did not know what to think or whether a dangerous criminal could strike again. The media circulated rumors and inaccurate information from the police, which only added to the public's anxiety. The police concluded that Natalie and Carter had been in a secluded area behind the supermarket between 2 and 3 a.m., just hours before their bodies were discovered by a motorist. The condition of the bodies and initial signs from the autopsy supported this time frame. Their parents believed the young couple had been home and asleep, raising the question of why they were in that area so late at night. After interviewing Natalie and Carter's friends, the police learned that they had run away to meet each other. They had been in a relationship but kept it a secret because they feared their families would disapprove due to their young age. As a result, they would meet in isolated locations in the evenings and at night. A witness who had passed by the supermarket about 30 minutes before the bodies were found reported that he had not noticed anything unusual at the time. He did not provide specific details and admitted that he may have missed important information due to the darkness. To gather more information, he contacted the public. The most interesting point was the time between 2 and 3 in the morning, which could greatly assist the investigation. Surveillance camera footage from the crime scene was available, with several recordings made at the same time. The area is usually busy only during business hours, and there is very little activity at night. It was clear that the video cameras were essential for safety, as the isolated and dark street was an ideal location for crime. The police noted that the location could attract young people, and nearby 24-hour restaurants were also considered potential meeting places. Several popular establishments were in the vicinity, including a well-known steakhouse. The police requested footage from these restaurants and began analyzing the recordings. However, they were unable to find any teenagers in the footage from inside these establishments. This suggests that Natalie and Carter were not there to eat but simply to spend some private time together. They posed no threat to anyone and were in a secluded area. Therefore, they may have been victims of random violence or involved in something more sinister. The family stated that the victims had no legal problems and were not involved in any suspicious groups related to alcohol or illegal drugs. They were not engaged in any business activities, and Natalie even volunteered to help teenagers struggling with addiction. The police were certain that the victims were not killed elsewhere, as they found no evidence that they had been dragged or transported in a vehicle. Initially, the police focused on drugs as a possible motive. This idea gained public support because the abandoned area around the supermarket appeared to be a hotbed of illegal activity. However, after 2 days, this theory was dismissed. Surveillance footage from the supermarket helped police identify the killer, described as a thin man with long, unkempt hair. Unfortunately, the footage did not capture his face or license plate number. However, the police were able to identify the suspect before Natalie and Carter's funerals. Police investigated and found that the suspect had used Natalie's debit card at a store near her home and at a gas station. Surveillance cameras captured him, and his cell phone's geolocation data was examined. He was actually near the supermarket at the time of the double murder. Police identified and arrested the suspect, 20-year-old Jeffrey Hazelwood, just a few miles from the crime scene. Initially, police were unsure of Jeffrey's motives, but they believed he acted alone. Multiple government agencies, including the FBI, were involved in the investigation. At around 5 a.m., police arrested Jeffrey at a gas station without any resistance. At the time, Jeffrey lived with his maternal grandparents, who adopted him when he was very young. Little is known about him, making it important to understand what might have driven him to kill Natalie and Carter. He was found to be an active social media user, with police and psychologists noting signs of internal struggles in his posts. The evening before the double murder, he shared a caption photo that read, "Always remember that you are unique, completely unique like everyone else." Some of his posts also contained darker themes and expressed thoughts of ending his life. Jeffrey's grandparents mentioned that he had been in legal trouble for years. A year earlier, he had been sent to a special academy for troubled youth due to his criminal activities. He was involved in a gang, and his grandparents reported that Jeffrey sometimes acted out to the point where they feared for their safety. Jeffrey's mother had separated from his biological father before he was born. During her pregnancy, she used illegal drugs, which negatively affected Jeffrey. From the beginning, she paid little attention to him and essentially abandoned him. As a result, he was sent to live with his grandparents, who lived near the site of the double murder. They were very religious and cared for Jeffrey as best they could, but he did not behave like a devoted grandson. Jeffrey's mother was ordered to pay $40 a week in child support, but she skipped the payments. This led her parents to take legal action, claiming that she owed over $12,000 in child support when Jeffrey was only 9 years old. Eventually, Jeffrey's mother began to care for her son and visited him twice a month. They attempted to set up a time to meet to help her learn how to care for a child, hoping to reunite and allow her to take on a more active parenting role in the future. However, according to Jeffrey's grandparents, he continued to have ongoing problems. In March 2011, Jeffrey failed to report to the police when he was under supervision. His maternal grandparents provided police with a note from Jeffrey stating that he planned to go into the wilderness to survive for a few days. However, he was carrying a 9mm pistol. After a few months, the police decided not to pursue the case further. Eventually, another family conflict arose. Jeffrey ran away again after several days of inappropriate behavior. After his arrest, he promised to behave, but a few months later, he was reported again for swinging a sword in his yard. When the police arrived, Jeffrey explained that he was practicing karate and was doing so outside behind a fence to avoid hurting anyone. However, his maternal grandparents told the police that Jeffrey was behaving inappropriately and posed a danger. Unfortunately, there was still no way to prove any malicious intent. In April 2013, Jeffrey's grandmother contacted the police again, reporting that about 6 weeks earlier, Jeffrey had threatened to blow up a building. Initially, the police did not take these threats seriously, but it soon became clear that the boy was preparing for something. Jeffrey's grandmother became suspicious when she discovered a sword and several knives on him. In February 2015, Jeffrey was charged with weapon theft. It is important to note that until the end, Jeffrey had not shown any aggression toward others and had not harmed his grandparents or strangers. Therefore, the violent actions that led to the deaths of Natalie and Carter shocked the boy's family. After the incident, one of Jeffrey's close friends spoke to the police, explaining that the boy was not a bad person by nature but had struggled with mental illness for many years. These mental health issues contributed to the tragic attack on the loving couple. Although Jeffrey was generally a caring and loving person, he changed dramatically when he began hearing voices in his head. Jeffrey often shared his struggles with a close friend. His issues began in elementary school and led to behavioral problems in high school. It got so bad that he was homeschooled and barely attended school during those years. About 4 months before the shooting, Jeffrey received a diagnosis indicating that he suffered from schizophrenia and other mental health issues. Although he had been on medication for a while, he stopped shortly before the incident, believing that he was getting better and no longer needed help. Sadly, he lost control, leading to the shooting of a stranger. The police worked tirelessly for nearly 2 days to gather details about the horrific crime. Their efforts led to charges being filed, and the trial began just 1 day after Jeffrey was arrested. The results of the forensic examination shed more light on the massacre. Forensic experts found no traces of male fluids on Natalie's body, but some of the injuries raised concerns about possible abuse. Natalie was shot at close range, while Carter was shot at medium range on the left side of the head. The murder weapon was never found. Before the hearing, Jeffrey claimed that he was not involved in the massacre but was merely a witness. He stated that he did not see the attacker but observed the events as they occurred. He mentioned that the girl was worth nothing when she got out of the car and that the attacker then killed them. After the shooting, the attacker took valuables from the car and the girl's purse. However, Jeffrey's testimony did not match the evidence, as surveillance camera footage revealed the actual details of the crime. Later, during a second interview, Jeffrey changed his story. He claimed that a stranger behind the supermarket was responsible. He alleged that this stranger threatened Natalie and Carter with a weapon and forced them out of the car. Jeffrey stated that he had a brief conversation with Carter before the shooting began. He claimed that the girl exited the car at the attacker's request, who then assaulted her on the hood before shooting her. However, this version was also deemed implausible, as police knew that no one else was involved. It was all Jeffrey himself, as shown in the video. During a third interview, Jeffrey confessed to the truth of the events. He admitted to committing all the crimes he had previously mentioned. New information came to light, indicating that he forced the couple out of the car while they were partially undressed. He shot Carter first, then forced Natalie to remove her shirt and underwear. He abused her on the hood of his car before killing her. According to him, he killed Carter first because he thought the young man was strong and capable of defending himself. It is unclear why Jeffrey committed the crime. He stated that he had moved out of his grandparents' house a few days earlier after being expelled from school due to his erratic behavior. He took his belongings, including the clothes he wore during the murder, which were later found hidden at his girlfriend's house, where he had been staying before the incident. Jeffrey's diary contained disturbing entries, including frightening thoughts about killing. His grandparents expressed fear for him. Just before the tragedy, he had mentioned end-life thoughts and a desire to harm others. Based on the evidence gathered, the prosecutor's office filed 12 charges against Jeffrey, including aggravated double murder, abuse, burglary, and illegal possession of a weapon. During the trial, Jeffrey appeared disheveled and unwell. His long hair partially obscured his face, and bystanders observed him mumbling to himself. His behavior became increasingly erratic, with footage showing him fondling an imaginary object on his leg. After a preliminary hearing, Jeffrey was denied bail. His attorney described him as extremely frightened and said he did not fully understand what was happening. The attorney, who took on the case pro bono, believes that everyone deserves legal representation. The defense focused primarily on Jeffrey's mental health, as independent experts had diagnosed him with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. The preliminary hearing was originally scheduled for September 9th but was postponed to October 28th. The prosecutor's office intends to pursue the death penalty for the double murder. When Jeffrey appeared in court, he reported that he had not been given his psychiatric medication while in prison. He claimed that he had repeatedly contacted the medical team for medication but had been ignored. The hearing was adjourned again, this time to February of the following year. While Jeffrey appeared unwell during the preliminary hearing, he told the jury otherwise. Jeffrey had been hearing voices for a long time. Some of these voices sounded like demons, while others sounded like friends. He believed he was receiving messages from God through the television and felt as though he was being watched through the walls. He was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, a mental illness that includes symptoms of both schizophrenia and mood disorders, and usually appears during adolescence. Jeffrey also had a long history of mental health problems. In 2001, he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. He struggled with anger management, which led to multiple hospitalizations in 2012 and 2013. With the help of appropriate medication, Jeffrey was able to appear in court and eventually grasp the proceedings. His doctor testified in court that Jeffrey experienced voices, hallucinations, and paranoia. Given the circumstances, Jeffrey pleaded guilty by reason of insanity, arguing that he was not in control of his actions when he attacked the two young men. The parents of the victims shared that even in their short lives, Natalie and Carter made a significant impact by dedicating their time to helping others, in stark contrast to their killer. While in prison awaiting trial, Jeffrey attempted to write letters of apology to the victims' families several times. However, he was only able to do so after his health improved with medication. The jury ultimately found him guilty, and Jeffrey Haywood received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of John Sweeney. John Sweeney was born on October 13, 1956. He grew up with an older brother and an older sister. People familiar with John's family described his father as a cruel and controlling man. From an early age, John was subjected to his father's strictness and was often the target of physical punishment. Psychologists later identified these harsh experiences as a major factor contributing to John's challenges as an adult. Despite their difficult living environment, John's family was close-knit and working class. His father instilled values of assertiveness and resilience in his sons. However, his methods were harsh, and he may have passed on his authoritarian attitude toward women to John, teaching him that women should always be submissive. Despite these hardships, John developed a strong passion for painting from an early age. At 15, he dreamed of attending art school, but his family did not support his aspirations. Instead, he studied carpentry and specialized in woodworking. This career path left John with a lingering sense of frustration, as he was unable to pursue his true ambitions and was forced to follow a different path in life. John had problems with the police from an early age. As a teenager, he displayed extremely violent tendencies, which led to a number of disturbing incidents. He frequently exhibited aggressive and violent behavior, often targeting his friends. One reported incident involved John getting into a dangerous fight while in high school at a nearby store where he was buying chips. Despite still being a minor, he picked up an axe and swung it aggressively. Witnesses said that, fortunately, no one was injured in the incident. The reckless teenager faced no serious consequences and was only given a warning by the police. By 1974, John had decided to marry. His wife, Ann Bramley, was his neighbor. Together, John and Ann had 2 children, a son and a daughter. Despite Ann's hopes that marriage and family life would calm him down, John remained ruthless, and nothing seemed to change his erratic nature. John's violent outbursts were especially severe when he was drunk. Ann revealed that he often harmed her pets to intimidate her and escalated conflicts by throwing bricks through windows, causing significant property damage. He repeatedly accused her of infidelity, even though she was faithful and gave him no reason to suspect her. Ironically, John himself had no qualms about pursuing romantic relationships with other women. According to family acquaintances, John treated his girlfriends as if they were his property. His first wife, Ann, experienced this firsthand. She described John Sweeney as sweet and charming until his mood changed. When this happened, he would focus on small issues, becoming aggressive and cruel. In these moments, he would easily explode and seem to invent reasons to justify his anger when none existed. after enduring this behavior for 5 years, and decided to file for divorce in 1979. However, like many manipulators, John tried everything to convince her to reconcile. Surprisingly, his efforts worked, and the couple remarried in 1981. During this time, John was able to control his behavior, leading Anne to believe that he had truly changed. Unfortunately, this did not last. Soon after they remarried, John's aggressive and uncontrollable behavior returned, and domestic violence once again became a regular occurrence. Before their relationship ended, they experienced another violent incident. One evening, John got drunk and attacked Anne. This event led her to make a firm decision to leave him and not attempt to mend the relationship. However, true to the behavior of a manipulator, John did not let go easily. Viewing his wife as his possession, John began stalking her. After Anne moved into a new house, an incident occurred while she was visiting a neighbor in the apartment next door. Through the wall, Anne heard suspicious noises coming from her apartment. She suspected it could either be John with malicious intentions or a burglar breaking in. Both possibilities seemed dangerous. Not wanting to take any chances, Anne called the police. When they arrived, the officers escorted her back to her apartment and searched the premises for any threats. Suddenly, John emerged from the closet, holding clothes in one hand and an axe and a knife in the other. He appeared startled to see the police and claimed he had planned to surprise his ex-wife. However, Anne believed he had brought the weapons with the intent to harm her, possibly even to kill her, as she had finally escaped his control. Unsurprisingly, the police did not believe John's story about the surprise and arrested him. However, he was later released without charges because he had not harmed anyone and was technically in his own apartment. The police only secured a verbal promise from him to stay away from Anne. After the divorce was finalized, Anne left with her children, moved away, and went into hiding to escape her dangerous ex-husband. Eventually, John gave up pursuing her. He decided it was time to change his life, leaving the city and embarking on a tour around Europe in hopes of forgetting his troubled past. He began searching for work abroad, believing he could find better opportunities and earn more money. Finding temporary jobs abroad was not difficult for John, but he never stayed in one place for long. He traveled to Germany and France before eventually settling in the Netherlands. Further investigations did not uncover any evidence of assaults on women during these trips. While abroad, John returned to his old habits, searching for a woman he could marry. However, his efforts were unsuccessful, and he was eventually forced to return to his homeland. Interestingly, upon his return, John rediscovered his passion for painting. Experts later analyzed his artwork and attributed its themes to his criminal nature. His paintings were gruesome, often violent and bloody, depicting brutal scenes. However, at the time, they were dismissed as mere works of art. Later, John made a living as a carpenter, taking on repair and construction jobs. He eventually settled in London, where he met Melissa Halstead, a model and photographer. She had hired him to do repairs on a film set. Melissa was an incredibly beautiful woman, and John seemed to take an immediate interest in her. Originally from Ohio, USA, Melissa had moved to another country in Europe, where she felt lonely and had few social connections. She was unaware of John's violent past. John quickly regained his charm, and after visiting her on set a few times, he suggested they meet. This marked the beginning of their romantic relationship. At first, Melissa described their relationship as warm and loving, reflecting John's manipulative behavior. Over time, they began living together. Less than a year later, John attacked her for the first time. Before this, he had repeatedly broken her self-esteem and cheated on her, leaving her feeling completely hopeless. Her career began to suffer, and her family back in Ohio recognized the toxicity of the relationship. Both her mother and sister urged Melissa to leave John as soon as possible. About a year after they met, Melissa's sister visited her in England. While staying at Melissa and John's apartment, she discovered banned substance and some disturbing artwork that John had created. She was shocked by what she saw. Before leaving, Melissa's sister begged her to end the relationship immediately. Despite this, Melissa chose to stay with John. In 1987, John committed his first violent attack on Melissa, which led to legal trouble. He was cautioned twice for his violent behavior. On one occasion, John threw a chair at Melissa, injuring both her legs. On another occasion, he punched her in the face. However, both times he only received verbal warnings and small fines. At the time, British authorities had a lenient attitude towards domestic violence. In the summer of 1988, John decided to move to Austria, and Melissa went with him. Initially, the move seemed to benefit their relationship. They reconnected and experienced a period without violence. During this time, things went well. They both made good money, and Melissa's modeling career began to take off again. She traveled frequently for work, and they could now afford to rent an apartment in central Vienna. However, their relationship soon fell apart. One evening, John's violent nature resurfaced, and he attacked Melissa with a hammer. She was taken to the hospital with a fractured skull. It seems that John harbored resentment towards her and became increasingly obsessed with his art. Psychologists later analyzed his artwork and concluded that it reflected his inner turmoil and violent worldview. Unfortunately, at the time these drawings appeared, no one paid much attention to John or recognized the warning signs. The haunting images clearly showed his desire to kill. While John was in prison, Melissa was recovering from the attack. Despite everything, she no longer resented John and even began to miss him. In February 1989, she appealed to the Austrian legal system, asking the court to pardon John. Under Austrian law, she had the right to do so. Her appeal was successful. Melissa withdrew her statement about the attack, and John was released after serving only 6 months. However, the police ordered John to leave Austria. Despite this, Melissa chose to follow him. They settled in Amsterdam together. In Amsterdam, John and Melissa rented an apartment in the city center, worked, and used a rental car. Their home was located near the train station. In November 1989, Melissa called her family. Since no one was home, she left a voicemail wishing her loved ones well, expressing her love, and saying that she hoped to see them again soon. After the call, she went on a business trip. In the following months, her family tried to contact her, but they were unable to reach her. At that time, cell phones were not available, making communication even more difficult. John also ignored all calls from Melissa's family. After a while, Melissa, exhausted by the constant conflicts and abuse from John, decided to end their relationship. She confided in her colleagues at work, telling them that if anything happened to her, it would be because of John. Soon after, she disappeared and was never seen alive again. On May 3, 1990, a passerby in Rotterdam noticed a suspicious bag floating in a canal. Upon inspection, the bag was found to contain body parts, although the head and hands were missing. The witness immediately alerted the police. The brutal nature of the crime became evident when the body was examined. What shocked the police most was that the victim's spine had been broken in half, and evidence suggested she had been subjected to prolonged torture designed to inflict extreme pain. After the murder, the perpetrator placed the body in a large black bag, which was then dumped in a canal. At the same time, Melissa's family grew increasingly worried, as they had not heard from her for months. A missing person report had been filed in Amsterdam, but since the Rotterdam police did not have access to it, they were unable to identify the victim. With no leads, the investigation was eventually closed. The unidentified remains were buried in a public cemetery in Rotterdam in an unmarked grave, and the police remained unaware of the victim's identity. John, the killer, escaped justice. By 1991, John had returned to London alone. He never told anyone about what had happened to Melissa. Her family suspected that John was involved in her disappearance, but there was no evidence to prove it. As a result, John continued his life without facing any consequences. At a local pub, John met Delia Balmer, a 40-year-old nurse. Their meeting was initially accidental, but John quickly used his charm to make her fall in love with him. Delia, feeling lonely, invited him to move into her house. John seized the opportunity, helping her with the housework and earning her trust. During this time, he worked as a carpenter, earning a good income by creating furniture and home furnishings. However, over time, John's true nature began to reveal itself. After nearly 2 years together, in December 1993, Delia realized the extent of John's temper and cruelty. She finally asked him to leave. Surprisingly, he did not argue and agreed to move out. However, he did not truly leave her life. John continued to frequent the same shops and bars as Delia, making sure they crossed paths often. Wherever she went, John seemed to appear, controlling and pursuing her relentlessly. He even attempted to re-enter her apartment. In May 1994, Delia went on a short trip around Europe with a friend. When she returned, John was furious that he had temporarily lost control of her. He tracked her down, tied her to the bed, and threatened her with a weapon, intensifying her fear. To further intimidate her, John told her a disturbing story about his previous girlfriend, Melissa. He confessed to killing Melissa, sitting with her body in his apartment for 3 days, and then disposing of her remains by dumping them in a canal in another city. Delia realized she was now trapped with a crazed killer. John demanded her complete obedience, warning her that if she did not comply, she would suffer the same fate as Melissa. Delia endured a week of abuse. During this time, she was repeatedly beaten, assaulted, and threatened with a weapon before finally being released in the summer of 1994. In July, Delia sought refuge at a shelter and reported the abuse to the police. She even showed them John Sweeney's disturbing drawings. However, the police dismissed her concerns, calling them a joke and accusing her of exaggeration. In early November, John left the apartment, and Delia took the opportunity to change the locks. When he returned on November 11th and discovered what she had done, he became furious. Despite locking the door, he managed to break in and attack Delia. The next day, Delia fled to the police station again. The officers escorted her back home, but John had disappeared. However, another attack occurred the following day. This time, Delia's neighbors and friends called the police. The officers arrived just in time, as John was inside the apartment with Delia. She ran out to meet the police, crying and terrified. During a search of the apartment, the police discovered a bag in the bathroom that John had brought with him. Inside the bag were rubber gloves, a mask, some rope, and surgical instruments, items that could be used by a murderer. Despite this alarming discovery, the police dismissed its significance. John was arrested and held for a week before being released on the condition that he return to his parents' home, 300 kilometers away from Delia. This distance was considered safe. But on December 22nd, John violated the terms of his bail by going to Delia's house in the evening. That night, Delia, feeling nervous, used a brick to block the basement door before going downstairs to put her bike away. She kept glancing around cautiously, afraid that John might be nearby. When she turned around, she saw John's familiar face staring at her. Suddenly, he pulled out an axe and swung it at her. She tried to defend herself with a knife, trying to cut his palm. Enraged, John grabbed the knife and attacked her. Delia screamed in pain and desperately used her bike as a shield against his repeated attacks. The commotion attracted the attention of neighbors. A man rushed to help, wielding a baseball bat and confronting John to protect Delia. John struck the neighbors several times before fleeing the scene. Delia was then taken to the hospital in critical condition, where she underwent several emergency operations that ultimately saved her life. The police began pursuing John Sweeney, who had fled. Despite their efforts, he evaded capture and escaped the UK. He remained in hiding for the next 6 years until he returned to the UK in 2000. To avoid detection, he used a false identity. John was highly skilled at altering his appearance, which made it easy for him to avoid detection. He quickly found work on construction sites and often used different fake names to remain unnoticed. After returning to his hometown, he met Paula Fields. Like John's other victims, Paula was lonely and vulnerable. Since they both came from the same area, John was able to establish a relationship with her quickly. Paula had spent most of her life on the streets. It was surprising that John managed to deceive her, as people like Paula, hardened by street life, were often very adept at reading others and recognizing manipulators or abusers. However, John Sweeney was such a skilled manipulator that he succeeded in fooling even someone like her. At first, their relationship seemed calm and romantic, but over time, John began to show signs of dissatisfaction. His frustration escalated into aggression and hostility. In December, John Sweeney committed a brutal crime. He killed Paula, and after handling the body, he placed the parts in separate bags. He disposed of the bags in the London Canal. On February 19, 2001, boys fishing in the canal discovered one of the bags containing Paula's body parts. They immediately contacted the police, who later recovered 5 more bags containing other parts of her remains. Advances in DNA technology helped identify the victim as Paula Fields and revealed a suspicious boyfriend. At the time, John was using an alias. However, further investigation by the police uncovered that her boyfriend's real name was John Sweeney. He was also linked to the murder of Melissa Halstead and was wanted for an attack on Delia Balmer. John became one of Britain's most wanted men. The police eventually tracked John down at a construction site in central London, where he was working. A specialist armed team was deployed to arrest him, as he was known to carry weapons. When apprehended, John did not resist, likely overwhelmed by the presence of heavily armed officers. A subsequent search of his flat uncovered over 300 gruesome works of art and poetry. Some of these artworks contained references to Paula and other victims. John Sweeney was later convicted of the attempted murder of Delia Balmer. On March 5, 2002, he was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after only 9 years. With good behavior, he could have been released even earlier. Delia was deeply unhappy with this outcome. As the police continued to investigate Paula Fields' death, they faced numerous challenges. It took another 6 years. In 2008, they were finally able to match DNA from an unidentified victim found in a Rotterdam canal to Melissa Halstead. This discovery linked John Sweeney to another murder. Delia's testimony, which included his confession, along with the presence of his DNA on Melissa's remains, played a key role in connecting him to this brutal crime. Melissa's murder had taken place more than 20 years earlier. Her family finally learned the truth and sought justice. Despite the evidentiary challenges, the police decided to use John's artwork as admissible evidence. Several of his drawings referenced Melissa's death long before her body was identified. One drawing even depicted a headstone bearing her name, details that only the killer could have known. Nearly 21 years after Melissa's death and 6 years after Paula's murder, the trial for these cases was held on April 4, 2011. John Sweeney was convicted of murder and sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. This ensures that John will spend the rest of his life in prison. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Shirley and Duguay. Choosing a soulmate is a very important step because this person can become the love of your life or a real nightmare. Shirley and Duguay was born on October 11, 1962. She was a native of Prince Edward Island, born and raised in the smallest of the Canadian provinces. Regarding her early years, she grew up in a close, knit family with two sisters. They had a loving father who supported them and was family-oriented, a value he passed on to his daughters. By 1994, Shirley was a 32-year-old mother of 5 children, 2 of whom were from previous relationships. However, she was going through a serious crisis with her husband, Douglas Beamish, with whom she had been in a relationship for several years. Shirley worked hard and devoted the rest of her time to her children. This was very helpful to her. She never lost faith in herself or people and maintained a positive attitude, constantly communicating with relatives and friends who supported her in every possible way. She truly needed that support as she barely managed to finalize her divorce proceedings with Doug. A dispute over custody of the children arose during their relationship, which had become increasingly oppressive. Shirley repeatedly complained that she was a victim of domestic violence. People in her close circle often saw traces of beatings on her. Despite the cruelty of the relationship, she rejected any proposals to separate, believing that her husband would simply kill her if she tried to leave. Even when Shirley reached a boiling point, her husband managed to keep her from getting a divorce. She was financially dependent on him, emotionally depressed, and simply afraid she would not be able to cope with the children without his support. Unfortunately, as they aged, his aggression began to shift toward the younger generation. At this point, Shirley sought support from the state to combat domestic violence. The Canadian justice system treated problems within the family with much less attention than the situation required. Despite numerous threats, statements, and evidence of aggression, Shirley failed to achieve any prohibitions or restrictions against Douglas. Finally gathering her strength, Shirley filed for divorce and moved out with the children. Now, the most pressing issue was the division of custody rights. During this period, she had 5 children aged 8 to 15. She feared for their health and safety given her husband's behavior. As a result, she sought sole custody of her 3 youngest children, fearing that Douglas would take revenge and shift his anger onto them. She intended to limit his opportunities for supervised visitations to no more than once a week. Additionally, she was counting on alimony because raising 5 children alone would be too challenging. Though she was already receiving small payments for 2 children from a previous relationship, it was not enough. Shirley's intentions only fueled Doug's anger. By the fall of 1994, she repeatedly expressed fears for her life. Yet, despite everything, she continued to hope for the best and led a normal life. On October 7, 1994, a woman found an abandoned car on Highway 169, near Tyne Valley in rural Prince Edward Island. She couldn't specify how long it had been there since she had been away from home for several days. Upon her return, she immediately noticed a car parked oddly in the middle of a field. When she approached to offer help to the driver, her worry grew. The car had no license plates, and on the windshield, there were numerous small splashes resembling blood. There was no one near the car, so she quickly contacted the police. Upon receipt of report, the law enforcement officers arrived at the scene and confirmed that something terrible had possibly happened in the car. Inside, they found many bloodstains but no signs of a struggle or dragging nearby, suggesting it had been abandoned far from where a confrontation had taken place. Investigators wondered if the victim of such an attack could have survived. Due to the lack of license plates, identifying the car took longer. Eventually, detectives discovered it belonged to 32-year-old Shirley and Duguay. They tried to contact her, but to no avail, as her address was not known. They could only find her father and children. As it turned out, none of her relatives or friends had heard anything about her despite several police calls. Shirley had stopped responding to calls 4 days before the witness reported the abandoned car, approximately on October 3rd. It was normal for her to leave periodically for work, so during that entire time, no one suspected anything was wrong. No one could find the mother of the children, leading the police to begin a search operation, considering Shirley might be in danger. Given the amount of blood in the cabin, it was evident that the attack had been committed with great cruelty. This was also indicated by the nature of the splashes, which were analyzed by experts. Blood doesn't randomly splatter all over a cabin from random blows, it suggested a prolonged beating. Such behavior was atypical for either robbery or abuse, as typically, brutal criminals are well acquainted with their victims. Naturally, the immediate environment of Shirley was inspected, and everyone who knew Shirley pointed to her ex-husband, Doug. There were no other suspects, only he had issues with her. This man constantly beat her and threatened her. Investigators decided to interview Doug. He confirmed that he had a tense relationship with his wife but blamed her difficult character. He denied any accusations of domestic violence and cruelty on his part, accusing his wife of wanting to spite him after the divorce. Given the capabilities of forensic science in 1994, it was not possible to quickly determine the source of the blood found in the car. Doug behaved calmly, and there was no evidence linking him to the crime. Despite numerous witnesses believing him guilty, this was deemed insufficient. The main problem was the absence of a body. It remained unclear what happened to Shirley, so she was still considered missing. Days, weeks, and months passed. It became obvious to everyone that she was likely not alive, but the only suspect persisted. Authorities combed a vast area with a radius of tens of kilometers around where they found the abandoned car. The squad did manage to find valuable evidence, but no direct indications of Doug's involvement. Detectives interrogated him repeatedly again, but to no avail. When they compared the blood found in the car with samples from Shirley's relatives, they confirmed that the profiles matched, which meant the victim of the beating in the car, as expected, was Shirley. Interestingly, in addition to Shirley's blood, traces belonging to someone else were found inside the car. Analysis compared to Doug's blood showed that the additional blood belonged to him. However, without a body, even this evidence did not establish a direct link to the crime or elicit a confession from him. He insisted that the car was his, as Shirley had used it during their 15-year relationship, and he could have repeatedly injured himself inside it. It was impossible to calculate the exact time of his bloodstains' appearance. All of this caused bewilderment and discontent among the relatives of Shirley. The local community was also outraged because a dangerous person was walking free. Many believed in Doug's guilt. The Duguay family insisted that he was the only one capable of such cruelty. In the car, there were numerous splatters of blood, and experts indicated they resulted from medium force blows. However, the police were not sure if the criminal had used a weapon. The cushion on Shirley's seat was soaked in blood. She had used it to sit while driving. Being a petite woman, about 150 centimeters tall and weighing around 45 kilograms, she needed the cushion to control the vehicle effectively. The cushion had blood from two different sources mixed. About 1 kilometer from the abandoned car, they discovered a shovel with traces of blood and 2 black hairs. This evidence became the first valuable clue examined by forensic scientists in the laboratory. Microscopic analysis and comparison with the hairs found on Shirley confirmed they belonged to her. By this time, the search operation had been underway for more than a month. The most significant find was a thick plastic bag containing a pair of sports shoes and a leather jacket, both covered in blood. The items were located 2.5 kilometers from Shirley's car. The blood stain analysis confirmed they belonged to Shirley. However, the shoes and jacket were clearly not her size, were more consistent with a man's. When questioned about the sneakers and jacket, Douglas denied ever having worn anything like that. Unfortunately, there was once again no confirmation of this, as his blood was not found on the jacket or shoes. Detectives noticed that the sizes matched, but this was not enough to bring charges. The list of evidence included significant circumstantial evidence. It turned out to be a tough nut to crack, so more information was needed. The found shoes were sent to shoe expert Key Beadle. He knew well that each person wears shoes in their own way. Differences in shape, size, and structure of feet result in unique features in mechanics. Each person's gait is as unique as their fingerprints. If the shoes had been worn for a long time, this would affect the geometry and wear characteristics. Dr. Key began studying the marks left on the insole and the inner surface of the sole. As part of the investigation, a warrant was obtained to create casts of Douglas's feet. This became an important stage in the process. In parallel, the expert analyzed the condition of the insoles and soles of the discovered shoes, revealing that the criminal had a deformed big toe. A small, twisted print suggested that Doug had used them. Nevertheless, Doug continued to deny his involvement. Forensic experts placed great hopes on analyzing the jacket, which had peculiar fibers, including 20 thin white hairs. With this exception, no other evidence remained on the clothing. The forensic experts examined the fibers under a microscope and found that they resembled animal hair rather than human hair. The detectives were busy with the investigation, and one of them recalled an important detail. When he first came to speak with Doug at his home, he saw a white cat named Snowball. By connecting the owner of the jacket to the animal, they could potentially establish who owned the item of clothing. The police became convinced that these lint particles were left by the criminal's cat, which led to the key question of how to prove the criminal's guilt through his pet. The search began for an expert who dealt with such matters. Detectives made hundreds of phone calls and were amazed to find that such studies had not yet been explored in the history of criminology and forensic science. The closest researchers were pet experts studying their genes to combat diseases. Dr. Stephen O'Brien, a geneticist from the National Institute in the USA, spent decades studying hereditary diseases in cats, including cancer. He knew more about pet genetics than anyone else in the world. However, even he did not promise much. Comparing the DNA profile of Snowball with detected fibers was a unique task. First, it was necessary to obtain a blood sample from the cat, but the owner of the pet was not inclined to cooperate with the police. A significant amount of time was spent just catching the cat on the street and getting a blood sample. Finally, Dr. O'Brien received samples of Snowball's materials, including fur, which were transported almost under escort. Fortunately, many of these hair follicles were preserved, providing enough for a DNA profile comparison. Dr. O'Brien confirmed that the fibers belonged to the same animal. However, a new question arose. Prince Edward Island was nearly isolated, and the doctor had serious suspicions that many domestic cats lived there, which could mean they were all related. If this was indeed the case, then comparing DNA profiles could show a match with any two animals in the province, calling into question all the work done. The police were not planning to give up, so they decided to gather at least 24 blood samples from cats in the area, which would later be delivered to Dr. O'Brien's laboratory for analysis and comparison. This process took even more time, during which the dangerous criminal was still at large. When the report was finally ready, Dr. O'Brien confirmed that there was great genetic diversity among the cats on Prince Edward Island. Not a single pair of the 20 samples collected matched. This led to the conclusion that, apart from Snowball, only one of the 70 million cats could have owned this fur, which became a turning point that confirmed the white fur of the jacket belonged to Douglas's cat. Despite this evidence, Douglas continued to insist that he had nothing to do with the jacket and claimed he had no idea where his ex-wife was. More than 6 months passed, but the body of Shirley was still not found. 7 months after the disappearance of Shirley, a random fisherman was sailing along the river in Enmore. He noticed something suspicious in the bushes along the shore but could not see it clearly. So, he decided to swim closer. From a distance of several meters, he realized that the remains definitely belonged to a person, but the stature was so small that the fisherman initially thought it was a child. They was far from the city, so he thought that wild animals might have dragged someone's body away. He covered the remains with his raincoat and went towards the city to contact the police. When the authorities finally arrived, they saw the remains of a woman in a state of severe decomposition. The situation was not as dire as it could have been because the remains had not been exposed to extreme heat, which partially alleviated the decomposition situation. The examination confirmed that the body belonged to Shirley and Duguay. Although it was buried, the body surfaced due to abnormal weather conditions that made the coastal soil unstable, causing it to wash away. Despite the degree of decomposition, it was obvious that Shirley had been subjected to cruelty. The exact cause of death could not be established. There were several theories. One suggested that she had been strangled, while another proposed that she was beaten with a shovel, as the shovel was found earlier. However, it could not be ruled out that the blood stain on the shovel was made after Shirley's death. The killer might have accidentally caused damage when digging up the makeshift grave. Shirley's jaw had been beaten and was broken in 3 places, with one of her missing teeth found in her lungs. The situation had changed dramatically, and it remained to be understood what the motive was, making it possible to hold Douglas accountable. After the body was discovered, investigators decided to take a fresh look at the old evidence and re-examine the area around Shirley's house and car. This yielded important results. First of all, they discovered a letter that had been overlooked earlier, contained threats. Thanks to this letter, the motive for the murder was revealed. It turned out that immediately after Shirley filed for sole custody rights, Douglas wrote her a frightening note in which he said he would be happier to see her in the grave than to lose the children forever. This could have been a cruel joke if not for the alarming fact that this letter was written in her ex-husband's blood. Unfortunately, Shirley did not have time to disclose this, publicize it, or show it to the police, as the criminal carried out his sentence earlier. Additionally, in the house of Shirley, they found photographs showing Shirley and Douglas together. He in the image wore the very jacket from which the hairs of his cat were later found. Finally, a little more than a month after the murder, Douglas was arrested and placed under custody until the hearing began. On July 19, 1996, Douglas Beamish ended up in court, largely thanks to his cat, Snowball, who was instrumental in the pursuit of justice. Douglas was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. This case became the first in crime history where DNA and animal materials were used as evidence of a criminal's guilt. According to Dr. O'Brien, the day he began examining and comparing those white hairs marked the birth of veterinary forensic examination. In the following years, this practice was utilized many times and led to the imprisonment of several dangerous criminals. The center at the University of California, Davis, has used its methods in more than 500 cases over the past 15 years, confirming that the tools used to profile human DNA also work reliably on animals. Shirley's daughter, Shelley, grew up to become an advocate for abused women. She spoke about how, as a child, she watched her mother being beaten by her father. After his conviction, Douglas ended up in the Ontario Correctional Centre. In 1998 and 1999, he tried to appeal his conviction but was denied, as DNA evidence is considered irrefutable. In 2013, he first attempted to exercise his right to parole. However, he was again refused, as the commission ruled that the risk of committing another crime was too high. This was not the end of Douglas's story. After almost 25 years behind bars, discussions began about releasing the killer from prison under escort for 12 hours. Another meeting of the parole commission was held, during which relatives were present. Shirley's sister, Marie Arsenault, spoke out, stating that the murder of her sister had triggered a series of family tragedies. One sister became addicted to alcohol as a means of coping with the pain of loss. It spiraled out of control after Shirley's death. She died first due to health problems, and then her husband committed to end his own life because he could not cope with the death of his beloved wife, having tried to save her until the last moment. She insisted that if Douglas was released, he should be prohibited from living on Prince Edward Island. Shirley's father suffered a series of heart attacks after Marie spoke at the parole board meeting. Interestingly, during these hearings, Douglas took responsibility for Shirley's death for the first time. Prior to this, he had persistently denied his guilt. The commission determined that he still posed a high risk of reoffending, including crimes related to violence and cruelty. Despite finally admitting guilt and realizing the seriousness of his actions, it was believed that significant work still needed to be done before he was ready for full parole. Until that point, he had found it easier to blame others for what had happened than to face the truth. During his time in prison, Douglas suffered 3 heart attacks and kidney failure, nearly dying several times. He is currently serving his sentence in Dorchester Prison, having been transferred there a year before the hearing, during which he was granted a 12-hour escorted release. He expressed a desire to attend a rehabilitation center for ex-offenders convicted of serious crimes located in the Moncton area. Notably, the parole board noted 2 incidents demonstrating that he was not yet ready for life on the outside. In 2019, he threw a knife while preparing food in the kitchen of a minimum security correctional facility, and a year later, he went on a hunger strike, claiming dissatisfaction with the food provided by prison staff. Following the end of the meeting, a decision regarding Douglas Beamish's 12-hour temporary release was not established. He himself stated that he believed he was not ready for full release but wanted to visit a rehabilitation center in Moncton as he did not want to return to Prince Edward Island. It is worth noting that the Correctional Service of Canada had previously allowed him to be temporarily absent under escort for medical reasons and out of compassion. Both occasions took place without incident. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Mary Stauffer. Mary was born in West Duluth, Minnesota, USA, and her family moved to the neighboring town of Hummontown when she was 10 years old. She had 3 siblings, all of whom graduated from a local school and planned to go to college. Mary attended college and graduated in 1965. She loved working with children and dreamed of teaching, a dream that came true when she got a job at a school. She is a math teacher. In her personal life, everything was also successful. She married a seminary graduate, Irv Stauffer. They were devout Baptists. They first went to the Philippines as missionaries in 1967, and the trip was successful. Mary taught in Minneapolis for a couple of years. Then they moved to Polk, Nebraska, where her husband was asked to become the pastor of a congregation. They dedicated themselves to serving the church there, where both of their children were born. In 1975, they returned to the Philippines to undertake a 4-year mission trip. There, they planted new churches on the islands and returned home to Minnesota in 1979. Mary was planning to go to the Philippines again, this time intending to take her children with her. A few days before the family was to leave for the Philippines, while they were in the suburbs of St. Paul, they were destined to meet a person who would turn their lives upside down. On May 16, 1980, the day began normally for 8-year-old Elizabeth and her mother, Mary. They arrived and parked near a hair salon on Cleveland Avenue. When they left the salon, they headed to their car. Mary immediately noticed a young man, who looked to be about 30, confidently approaching them from the direction of a busy intersection. He looked at them strangely, and Mary instinctively felt uncomfortable under his gaze, but she did not panic since they were in a busy area. This young man did not look particularly dangerous. He stood out because of his thick glasses. Mary assumed he was merely asking for directions or something similar. However, when he approached the car, he took a gun from his belt, placed it next to the hood, and demanded a ride. In horror, Mary was ready to give up the keys to the car that the church had given them if only he would let them go. But the criminal did not want the keys. He forced Mary and her daughter to sit in the front, demanded that she drive north. Mary tried to influence the attacker, calm him down, and persuade him to let them go. She convinced him that if there were any problems, he could turn to the church, which would not abandon its parishioners in trouble. Mary stoically remained calm, trying to soothe the kidnapper and even bribing him. However, all her efforts were in vain. She even turned to the Bible, but the kidnapper was clearly not ready to listen to the Holy Scriptures. He ordered them to be quiet and keep driving. When they stopped at the nearest intersection, a patrolman pulled up next to their car. The kidnapper threatened to kill Elizabeth if they went in the same direction as the policeman or gave him a signal. Mary was forced to change their route, and the kidnapper noticeably relaxed. They drove to a wooded area in Anoka, stopping at a deserted camping site. There, the attacker ordered them out of the car and deeper into the vegetation, cautiously looking around. He forced them into the trunk, tied the mother and daughter together, taped their mouths shut. He then got behind the wheel and drove into the countryside. There, he planned to pick up a spare tire for his van, placing it in a trunk right on top of the captives. At that moment, 2 neighborhood boys became curious about what was happening and came dangerously close. One stood in front of the car while the other, named Jason Wilkman, approached the trunk from behind. The little boy curiously looked at the wheel and seemed to notice something underneath it. The kidnappers saw Jason and panicked. Without thinking twice, he grabbed Jason and threw him into the trunk with the others. When Jason's friends saw what had happened, he immediately ran home to tell his family. The kidnapper chased after him but was too far behind to catch up. In a panic, he jumped behind the wheel and took off. Jason was crying, and Mary tried to talk to him, but he was too scared, could only tell her his name and age. She tried to calm the children down, and it worked. At least they stopped crying. The trip was short, but Mary heard them moving around in the rough terrain. Branches and bushes constantly hit the vehicle as the criminal drove deep into the forest for several kilometers. Here, he pulled Jason out of the trunk and took him away. A few minutes later, he returned alone, did not open the trunk, but simply got behind the wheel and drove away. Mary prayed that he would just let the innocent child go because she did not hear any shots, but gloomy thoughts crept into her mind. Mary's car was left in the bushes. It was hard to see because he was increasing the distance from the police. The kidnapper got into a black van without windows, along with Mary and her daughter. Before driving off, he double-checked the ropes on his captives, then returned to the city and took them to his electronics store, where he allowed them to use the toilet and gave them juice to drink. They stretched their limbs, which had gone numb. Mary tried to find out what he wanted, but instead of answering, he taped both their mouths shut again, tied them up, put them back in the van, and drove them to his family's house in a neighboring town. The small house was only 10 kilometers from the apartment where the Stauffer lived with their children. Nevertheless, Mary and daughter did not know where they were. They were mistaken while he wandered through many places. The criminal took both of them to the bedroom of the house, which was small, dark, and cramped. He removed the door handle and locked the door. Getting used to the darkness and looking around, Mary and her daughter realized they were in a kind of storage room filled with clothes, toys, but there was nothing that could help them. At the same time, Mary's husband, Irv, and her son, Steve, were waiting for the return of the mother and daughter from the beauty salon. They had a family dinner planned, and the last preparations were to be made before leaving. Both should have returned long ago, which began to worry the household. At 4:30 p.m., Irv called the salon, and the hairdresser confirmed that the visitors had left long ago but had no idea where they were going or what could have happened. Irv called his wife's friends, but they did not know where she might be. Then he turned to other members of the Baptist community and involved them in the search. They all called local hospitals, acquaintances, police stations, and even morgues to find the missing. When no information could be obtained, Irv contacted the police. However, from the very beginning, it was obvious that they suspected of himself of the disappearance of his wife. By that night, the authorities were already engaged in the search for a 6-year-old boy, Jason Wilkman. The search for Mary continued. Irv explained that he was not involved in the disappearance of his wife and daughter. He and his son were waiting for them at home and had no idea what happened after they left the hairdresser. But the authorities did not believe him and suspected he had done something to them. The next morning, a car was found. They even managed to find 2 sets of fingerprints on the steering wheel, but their owners were not in the police database. The car had no license plate, so investigators could not determine whose car it was. The area around the car began to be thoroughly searched. First of all, they found the car's license plate. It had been torn off when the criminal escaped through the bushes. Suspicions arose that Jason's abduction and the disappearance of Mary and her child could be connected. This helped them know that the car belonged to Mary. It seemed that everything was very serious, and the missing persons were in danger. About 300 police officers and volunteers were gathered to begin the search operation. Announcements were published featuring images of the missing. Based on the words of the boy's friend, a composite sketch of the kidnapper was created. From that moment on, the authorities' suspicions regarding Mary's husband only intensified. Ironically, the composite sketch bore a striking resemblance to him. Both he and the kidnapper were dark-haired, wore glasses. Bert became the main suspect in the disappearance of the 2 children and Mary. However, Bert provided an alibi supported by a photo and passed a lie detector test. His fingerprints did not match those found in the car, yet the authorities still did not want to clear him as a suspect. Berv continued to emphasize his innocence and pointed out that the investigation's misconceptions were leading them away from the real goals of the search operation. Before her first trip to the Philippines, Mary had taught at the school, and among her ninth grade students was Ming Sun Xiu, a teenager of Taiwanese American descent, with whom Mary had a good relationship. He showed great promise in sports and also had significant academic success. It seemed that the teenager had a great future ahead of him. Later, former students of Mary said that Ming was enamored with his math teacher. He thought she seemed smart and stately. After Mary went to the Philippines, she returned and moved to another city. Ming became truly obsessed with his teacher and constantly remembered her. He began to pursue his secret love, and it looked radical. Confusing the younger of Stauffer with his father, also named Irv, Ming showed up at Mary's in-law's house in Duluth on the 4th of July and held of Sr. at gunpoint. Ming took him into the house and told him to call his wife to the room. When Mary's mother-in-law entered, Ming realized his mistake. Ming claimed he was simply mistaken and threatened that if they went to the police, he would return and shoot them both, and then he ran away. The elderly couple had no idea that Ming was really interested in the younger Irv. They never reported it anywhere and didn't even tell the mayor and his son about the incident until they returned from the Philippines in 1979. No one had any idea who could have attacked the families, neither the motive nor the goals were known. Mary only found out that the attack was carried out by Ming when he had already taken her and her daughter prisoner. He proudly told her about it before attacking her. Mary had no idea that he had been spying on the family from the forest, which was located not far from the house where they settled. Probably, he decided to attack because he saw preparations for departure and understood that soon they could leave again for a long time. Shortly before the kidnapping, Ming even tried to get through the doors of the patio, but nothing came of it. Later, he attempted to get through the storage room and drilled several holes. Burr found sawdust and removed it, but he still did not understand the relevance of their appearance. Now everything fell into place. In the meantime, the captives experienced the hospitality of the criminal. Immediately after the kidnapping, Ming admitted that Mary was lucky that her family was not nearby during the surprise attack, as he was ready to do anything to take her, even kill everyone. The next day after the kidnapping, he pulled Mary out of the closet, spread a blanket on the floor in the living room, tied her up. After that, he made a 3-hour video interview in which he revealed his identity. Mary remembered Ming when he spoke about math lessons at school. He reminded her that he was the student she had failed in exams. Mary immediately recalled who he was but could not understand what he meant. He told her that he couldn't get an academic scholarship because of her, as his parents had died, and he couldn't afford to go to college because of that. After losing his place in school, he was drafted into the Vietnam War, which led him to a prison camp where he experienced some tough times. He blamed Mary for all of this. Now, he wanted to make her pay. There was one flaw in this tragic story: Ming had made it all up. Mary remembered perfectly well that he graduated from high school with excellent marks, so he could easily have received a scholarship to any college. In reality, he attended the University of Minnesota and graduated from there. He never served in the army and instead immediately opened his own store. Mary realized that his story was a lie designed to impose a sense of guilt and manipulate her. In fact, Ming lived in a fictional world. He wrote fantasy stories about many women whom he abused, and after that, they begged him to be with them. Among these fantasies was his 9th grade math teacher. During a video interview, he revealed his intent not to cause physical pain but to inflict emotional trauma so that she would feel dirty, humiliated, and insulted. The footage included more than 6 hours of assaults. Over the next few days, a friend of Ming returned a borrowed camera but kept the tape of the torture. He abused Mary daily. Ming claimed he was not a pedophile. He never abused Elizabeth, nor did he force her to watch the torture of her mother, although he repeatedly threatened to do so. Unfortunately, this did not mean that Beth would remain on the sidelines of his villainous fantasies. Elizabeth turned out to be a pawn in his fictional stories. Ming demanded that Mary show love, but she refused because she was a believer and a devoted wife who had promised to love only her husband. To force she to submit, he threatened to place her daughter in a thick plastic bag and tie it shut, claiming that it would take 4 to 5 minutes for Beth to inhale all the oxygen, after which she would die. He also threatened to kill all the members of her family one by one until Mary obeyed. Mary was forced to meet him halfway. She kissed him on the cheek, feigning love, but this was not enough. Only a kiss on the lips calmed him down. Then he removed the bag from her daughter's head. Later, during a similar incident, he left Elizabeth in his van for 4 hours. This happened on a hot summer day, and in the scorching sun, the girl miraculously did not die. This experience finally convinced Mary of the need to obey him, otherwise, they would be in trouble. In the meantime, their family continued to hope that they would see both Mary and Elizabeth alive. Weeks went by, and according to statistics, the probability of the missing returning after such a long period was practically zero. After 2 weeks, the police called Irv and reported that they had found a woman's body in the forest, which was presumed to be Mary's. He provided his wife's dental records and was relieved to learn that it was not her, and therefore, there was still hope for the safe return of both his wife and daughter. Meanwhile, life in captivity continued. After some time, Ming softened the strict rules of the internal regulations. He allowed his captive to eat in the kitchen, take a shower on the 10th day, even gave Elizabeth several board games and a TV. He began to affectionately call her Betty. Despite the circumstances, this looked very unpleasant. During this period, Ming forced Mary to write 2 letters to her husband. In the first letter, she was to convince the police that she had not disappeared but had simply run away from her hated husband, whom she no longer loved. In the second letter, he voiced demands that the police stop their interference, or else no one would ever see either of them again. Ming still led a double life. He was involved in business management and worked in his electronics store as if nothing had happened. From the outside, it seemed that he was quite decent and that his life was completely ordinary. In reality, he was a kidnapper and a murderer. After 3 weeks, Ming took a rented mobile home and went with his victims to the fair in Chicago. Before that, they stopped at a shopping center in Madison, Wisconsin, to change clothes, as they had been wearing their old clothes since the abduction. Both victims were under close watch from him. He would not allow them to escape. He kept one of the 2 by his side, and in case of escape, he promised to kill the other. This was how he was able to grant them some relative freedom of movement, albeit within reasonable limits. Despite all of Mary's efforts to warn the police by using a receipt from her bag while shopping, the bank was notified and, unfortunately, the FBI never received the information. It apparently got lost. When Elizabeth was left unattended for a while in a shopping mall, she attempted to tell a group of teenagers that something had been stolen, but they just laughed and walked away, not believing her story. By the end of this little trip, all 3 even stopped by the University of Minnesota campus to watch fireworks. During this time, at least 3 police cars drove past them. However, Mary knew that the criminal had a gun with him, and she feared that he might harm them without thinking twice if she called for help. So she remained silent, despite her hopes. On July 7, 1980, Mary and Elizabeth faced serious difficulties. Ming realized that he could not remain in his house forever without being noticed. Therefore, he decided to buy a mobile home for the 3 of them, making it clear that he intended to continue this madness and wanted to eliminate any possibility of being caught. Mary understood that there might not be any other chances to escape, so she planned to wait for him to leave for work before trying to free herself. The next morning, Ming went to work as usual, and Mary began her fight for freedom. She managed to muster enough strength to remove the heavy door from its hinges, from which the captive's shackles were attached. Until that moment, they had been unable to do this. Suddenly, she heard some noise and feared that Ming had returned. Mary was instantly frightened. She acted quickly and returned everything to its original state, as if they were still tied up. They seemed to sit and listen forever until finally, they calmed down, realizing that Ming was gone. The nervous tension played a cruel joke on them, but the situation did not improve because precious time had been lost. Mary had no idea when their tormentor would return. She got to the phone and called the county sheriff's office. She was put on hold twice before finally contacting the detective who was leading the search for the 3 missing people. Thanks to a tag from a dry cleaner, she provided the address where she and her daughter live. Mary was most shocked by the policeman's question about whether Jason was with them. It was then that she realized that the child had never returned home and was probably killed in that forest during a stop. In fear of Ming's return, they simply hid in the storage room, afraid that their tormentor would soon come back. Fortunately, the police arrived before long, and the mother and daughter were freed. Both victims were photographed, having remained shackled with bicycle cables for almost 2 months. FBI agents went to Ming's shop, searches were conducted, and the criminal was arrested without resistance. A few days later, Mary went north to visit her family. Her happy release from captivity, along with her daughter, became a real sensation. However, in reality, their misadventures were not over yet. Just a few days after being incarcerated, Ming hired a killer. It turned out to be a cellmate, Richard Green, who was about to be released from prison. He asked Green to commit the murder of Mary and Elizabeth so that they could not testify against him. Additionally, Green was supposed to help Ming escape from prison in exchange for a promise of $50,000 once the job was done. As an advance, he handed over a check for $1,000. Fortunately, this plot failed, and the criminal was caught. Richard did not admit that he was hired. This was only discovered during a second interrogation and after checking the financial transactions. The prosecutor's office had more than enough evidence to build a strong case. The jury ultimately viewed a 3-hour interview that fully revealed Ming's insidious plan. The hearing was a tense moment for all involved. The mayor had to walk between the prosecution and defense tables. As soon as she asked Mary the first question, Ming jumped up and attacked the mayor. However, the prosecutor blocked his path. The guards knocked him down and immobilized him. The hearing lasted 10 days, after which Ming was found guilty of kidnapping. Difficulties arose even before the hearing began. He confessed to one of the psychiatrists who worked with him that he knew where the body of Jason Wilkman. He was then offered a plea bargain. The authorities agreed to reduce the charge to second-degree murder. In late October, Ming led the police to the boy's body. Jason had died from blunt force trauma to the head, inflicted from behind. Ultimately, Ming Sen Shiu was sentenced to life in prison but retained the possibility of parole after 30 years. Mary then had to testify again as a material witness in the trial for Jason's murder. It seemed that this terrible story was about to end. However, this time Ming was prepared for the meeting. He secretly brought a knife into the courtroom. During cross-examination, when Mary was answering questions, he jumped up from his chair, grabbed her by the neck from behind, and took her hostage, holding the blade near her throat. Fortunately, there was a policeman behind who managed to snatch the knife away and prevent the murder. As a result, Mary suffered a cut that went through her chin and the corner of her mouth, requiring 62 stitches. The second trial was postponed. As part of a plea bargain, Ming confessed to the kidnapping and second-degree murder of Jason, after which he was sentenced to 40 years in prison, with the terms of the sentences to be served concurrently. The case of this dangerous criminal was again in the spotlight. In 2010, the judge ruled that, in the case of parole, Ming Sen would be sent to undergo a state program for individuals who have committed violent abuse crimes. According to the judge, Ming met the criteria for criminals who require life imprisonment. After many hours of evaluating psychiatric reports, it was decided that he posed a permanent threat to society. For Mary, this decision came as a great relief, as Ming had openly declared to Beth, and then the entire family, that if he were ever released, he would come for them. Curiously, Ming's business was estimated by experts to be worth about $250,000. The Stauffer family filed a civil suit against him as compensation for illegal restriction of freedom and emotional distress. However, upon hearing about this, Mary declared that the right to seek justice belonged only to the Lord God, and she refused to pursue the case. After all these events, Mary repeatedly stated that despite all the evil this man caused, she continues to pray for him. Ming Sen Shiu is currently being held at the medium-security federal prison in Marion, Illinois. The ordeal of Mary Stauffer and her daughter Elizabeth stands as a chilling testament to the depths of obsession and the fragility of ordinary life. Yet, through nearly 2 months of unimaginable torment, Mary's unwavering faith and courage not only secured their escape but also illuminated a path of resilience for her family. The tragic death of Jason Wilkman and the scars left on the Stauffers underscore the devastating ripple effects of one individual's malice. Decades later, with Ming confined and deemed a perpetual danger, Mary's choice to forgive and pray for her captor reflects a profound strength that transcends vengeance. Her story endures as both a sobering warning of unchecked obsession and an inspiring reminder that even in the face of profound evil, hope, faith, and the human spirit can prevail.